Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show, brought to you by and always powered by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85. We are clearing our voice. We are deep into it already. March Madness has begun. We are 3 days into March. Conference tournaments are going. We've got buzzer beaters happening already. This just tells me that this is going to be one wild ass conference tournament and tournament season. I am very excited about the potential parity of this season's tournament. I think we could have one of those 11 seeds to the Final Four. I think if ever there was a time for a 16 seed to beat a 1 again, I think this would be the season to have it happen. Like, there's just so much chaos that's going to happen in the tournament, and we're seeing it already in these conference tournaments. Longwood Lancers, last year's Big South Tourney champions, fell today. My guys at USC Upstate got a banked-in three-pointer to advance. We saw on the women's side, UMKC had like this crazy three-quarter court to half-court shot that they made. It's just already so much madness. I love it. Can't even stand it. Very excited. I got my buddy here in my lap, my kitty. He's going to be making some plays, I guess. Tonight's show is going to be fantastic. We have our final regular season Saturday slate coming up. With the main slate, we're going to primarily talk about from a DFS perspective, which leads me into, if this is your first time watching the show, I want to welcome you. What we do here is cover college basketball in a myriad of ways, from a DFS perspective, prize picks, prop betting, size, and overall betting market in general. If you're returning to the show, welcome back. Pull up your seat, put on your name tag, grab your coffee, your beer, your pizza, whatever it is that you need, and let's get started here. I am going to be joined by a co-host for a second Friday in a row. I'm excited. That will save my voice a little bit. We are still grinding through the current slate. New Mexico, Colorado State is in halftime, and then the San Fran WCC game is going on as well. Portland just lost to BYU, which was very sad. I wanted a little bit more Portland here, but very fun. Lots of stuff going on. If you're not a member of that FTN network still, you need to get over there. There's still time. We still have over a month of tournament games and regular season, a couple of days here, conference tournaments, NIT, CBI. There's so much opportunities to make money. Use my code DUB to get yourself 20% off that first month. Articles, Discord access, optimizers, exposures, trackers, everything that you could possibly think of and need. We'll even deliver a beer to your house if you sign up. I'll send you a beer. You just let me know and I'll send it to you. 40 ounce all the way. All right. So we're going to get into this slate here. I'm going to welcome my special guest here. This is the second time he's been with us. The man, the myth, the legend, Eric Rasmussen. Razzle is in the house. What's up, man? How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Just getting the energy up here. I'm excited that you were able to come on. Our guy Mike, he's headed to I guess North Carolina or something, or ACC country. He's going to be watching some ACC tournament action live and in person. He was showing off his jerseys earlier, so I'm glad that you were able to jump on with me and help me out, because doing these Friday shows alone is kind of strenuous. So I'm always happy to have a helper. We will be talking game by game, breaking it down, talking about our favorite plays, any sneaks, maybe some ownership talk, strategy talk. We'll also interact with the chat. So make sure if you guys are watching live that you're posting in the live chat. We'll get to your comments, questions, concerns. Make sure that while you're at it, you're hitting that like button. It helps the show be seen. Anytime someone searches college basketball, DFS, any of that kind of stuff, the more interactions, the more likes you give us, the better chance our show has of being seen. All right. So let's get going here. Yeah, and more coffee. We all need more coffee. What's up, Saw in the chat? Awesome. Love to see it. Old Blog Talk Radio favorite. All right. So we're going to talk DK specific. I know FanDuel's been rolling out a couple of slates, which just the last FanDuel slate that I looked at when the Huskies were on it, which would have been yesterday, right? They had Keon Minifield at 3K in their infinite wisdom. So I'm glad FanDuel is actually rolling out some CBB, but clearly still does not give a damn about what they're doing over there. All right, so first game on this. I'm going to have to put you down, Kitty. You're a little too much. All right, so first game on the slate, Alabama versus Texas A&M, and I'm glad to start with Alabama because, as we get through these first couple of games and talk, and you get to the middle part of the show, and especially on these late night shows, which I've been doing some daytime shows here the last couple of days, Raz, And you start to get a little mush brain, and sometimes you're just like, man, what's this slate starting to blend together? And then you might say something like, Javon Quinterly's a core lock. He's the best play of the slate. So at least we get to start with Alabama, where maybe we don't have to say something super reckless like that. Or maybe we do. Maybe Javon Quinterly is the best play on the slate, and at 4-7 as the super chalkiest play after scoring 30 fantasy points against Arkansas, 42 fantasy points against Auburn, played over 28 minutes in both games. There's no way that Coach Oates would possibly play him for 12 minutes with 80% ownership, right, Raz?
Yeah, there's a chance that happens.
Yeah.
I was talking to Scott earlier, saw, and like Road Quinterly just seems like a recipe for disaster. Like, 3 turnovers in the first 2 minutes that he's out there, benched, plays 18 minutes, and just tanks everybody's lineup. So from my notes, I've completed them already for tomorrow. Right now, I am leaning towards a Javon Quinterly full fade.
Yeah, I definitely am on board with that. I'm toying with the idea of just doing the mini max tomorrow instead of a main lineup, just so that I could have a little exposure and not have to worry about it. But yeah, if I'm running a main lineup and doing the Q high dollar, any of that stuff, I think it makes too much sense to fade him at 4-7, almost 5K. He's just high enough to where, he can do some serious damage to your lineup if he ends up playing less than 20 minutes and has a rough outing. And Texas A&M is defensively top 50. They're a pretty solid group. They rebound well, and they're able to slow games down a little bit. And I just feel like, yes, there's some disaster written all over this one, and it just seems like such an obvious spot. I'm so uncomfortable with using him. I'm so uncomfortable with fading him. Some guys, when they're chalk, like Cuisinart, who's on Oregon now, but when he's in South Carolina, every time he was chalk, it was just like such an easy fade because you just knew there was so much risk there. But with Quinterly, it's just so tough because he sucks us in and does this every time. And it's a matter of, yes, if he gets the minutes, he'll be fine. The matchup's not great, but 28 to 30 minutes at this price, it's definitely a solid spot. But I think I'm with you. I'm going to have a really difficult time believing this mini trend here of 2 games over 25 minutes is going to continue. Especially with it being the last game on the slate. The last game of the season for them before the tournament starts, the SEC tournament. Might Oates want to give some other guys some minutes just to get them a little more prepared and get all the butterflies out and ready for their first conference tournament action. That's something that we could definitely see. But I'm almost certain we're going to see over 50%. It's a large slate too. So when you have a guy who's going to be this volatile, this projected, like highly owned as 50% plus, I'm certain of it. It just makes way too much sense to get away from him. Which brings me up to, do we want to look at Jaden Bradley, who's down all the way at 3-6? He had been, starting games, played 27 minutes last time out against Auburn. We know he also, has a pretty short leash with the staff, and if he comes out, misses a bad shot or gets a turnover or misses a defensive assignment. I've watched a lot of Alabama games this season. I really like Bradley, and I think he's going to be awesome in the future, but he's also got that short enough leash that he could do a little bit damage, less damage than Quinterly though, because he comes in at 3-6. So I'm maybe, that's the pivot for $1,100 less. We have some maneuverability. We can get an extra pay up in there without having to worry so much. Maybe there's a chance they both bust, but if they do, at least we have that extra salary that we're able to route somewhere else. So I think I'm looking a little bit towards Bradley there, even though, again, this matchup against Texas A&M isn't that great. We also have my man, Nimari Burnett, down there at near min price at 3-1. It looked like he was going to play a lot. He had like 8 minutes in the first half, and then he barely played in the second, but it looked like he was, pretty comfortable out there. So I'd like to see them push him closer to 20 minutes as well. He's another guy that I want to have some GPP exposure to. And then maybe rotate through, guys like Nick Pringle, who I know are very risky. Rylan Griffin, who has been hovering around that 15 to 16 minute range typically. Mainly with these Alabama guys, I just want to get exposure throughout my various GPP builds just in case one of them does go off. Now, knowing that people are going to be on Quinterly, are you maybe looking towards saying, F it, I'm just going to go up and pay for Brandon Miller and hope he just, drops a 50, or are you kind of just leaning away from Alabama in general?
Miller's in my spend up pool. I've only built one lineup so far, but I'm kind of with you where I think Bradley's the play as the pivot off of Quinterly. But then also if, as you talked, I had some thoughts coming to mind. Like if Quinterly is going to struggle with turnovers, gets benched, whatever, all of a sudden he drops back to, 18 minutes or whatever. I think Mark Sears sneaky GPP play. Puts him on the ball a little bit more, gets him some more assists, gets him into the game more. And then obviously he can get hot from 3 as well. So I think he might be the sneaky play if you're off of Quinterly. I just don't know how much I'm going to get there because right now I'm leaning more towards a Star Scrubs type build.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. The Sears being the sneaky play, and he's at a kind of a weird price that's mid 6K range tends to get ignored a lot because, like you said, when people are looking for that studs and scrubs build, they're not able to get to that range, and a lot of times on the more balanced, you end up seeing a lot of 5K to 7K guys, and that 6K range just ends up being a lot of lower owned guys. So that's an interesting point on Sears. How about the Aggies? For me, I hate targeting against Alabama because defensively they've been so good. I know they've given up some fantasy points here to a couple of guys recently, but overall this season they've been a good defense. Texas A&M's been a good defense. We did see Dexter Dennis miss last game, I believe it was, and then that put on the Tyrese Radford show, which he's a guy that I'm never like super interested in. He's up to 7-3 now, so I don't have to be, but might we see him be a little bit more popular, or might we see him be a more of an optimal play without Dexter Dennis? So where are you at here with the Texas A&M guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to consider Radford just because of his stat stuffing ability. He did take 20 shots last game without Dennis, so he only made 5 of them, but like the usage was there. Andre Gordon, he might even start anyways, even if Dennis is back because it's senior day, I believe. But like he's another cheap value play that if he gets 25 minutes, he can go for 15 again. But it's tough to love Texas A&M. I think Taylor's like the perfect cash game play, but I don't know that he has 5x upside, to win a slate at 8,600. So, I may just end up with nobody on A&M, even though, and it's weird because they're obviously favored, against Bama. So they have a decent team total, but I don't know. It's a price point thing, I guess.
Yeah, and that the Aggies they're such an inconsistent squad. The only one you really can trust these days is Wade Taylor, but you're having to pay such a steep price, almost 9K for him. It's pretty restrictive there for what you might want to do higher up, for some of these other pay-ups. There are some values to potentially look at. You mentioned Andre Gordon. I had him in Dynasty a couple seasons ago. He's he's not quite a stand in the corner guy, but he's like a stand and dribble. When he has the ball, he'll just dribble, pass, dribble, pass. Like he doesn't do a whole lot, but yeah, if he gets 20 plus minutes, I guess he's somewhat interesting. Kind of looking at maybe some Solomon Washington action at 3K, although maybe we see, you mentioned the senior day thing, Washington's a freshman. Maybe he's the big loser there in terms of playing time, doesn't get quite as much as maybe he has been seeing lately, which he did see 16 minutes last time, which isn't a huge amount by any means, but he is an interesting player, somebody that they like for the future, somebody to keep an eye on. So I'm kind of interested in him to a degree. I always like Anderson Garcia. He's if you watch the basketball games, not just the box scores and actually watch, he's always around the ball. He's super active. He's never standing in one spot. He usually is right around 18 to 20 minutes. 4.4, maybe a little bit high for him, but somebody else that I could see potentially using. I just really like him he's the type of guy you'd want to have on your team. It's just like that preeminent role player that is the missing piece for you to win a title. I wish he was on a better, a little better team, but I do definitely like him. My man, Manio Obasaki, he's back. He played 11 minutes, shot 4 times, had 6 fantasy points. He has a very high usage rate, a very high shot rate. So maybe we see Manny play a little bit more prior to his, missing time with ailments. He was up there playing 20 minutes at times. He's only 3.3. So you have some very risky, but some value to be had here, definitely for large field GPPs and guys that you'll get to yourself in these, mini max, 1% ownership type plays. All right, moving on. We have Ohio State versus Michigan State, the dumpster fire that is the Buckeyes. They ran into a situation where, wow, they played outrageously well, and they beat Maryland, and they beat them handily. Ended up being an 11-point win, but Maryland was really never in it. The only real story of that game is the fact that my man Julian Reese is a dude now. But Justin Suing playing good basketball, Bruce Thornton playing good basketball. We saw Felix Okpara finally did something besides fouling and fouling. So that really interesting here for the Buckeyes. They have a matchup against Michigan State. We know front court wise, this is a great DVP spot, but I don't know that we'll be able to necessarily take advantage of it because we don't have Zed Key at our disposal. So we would really have to be looking at Felix Okpara, which I guess isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but because of that foul risk with him, and because on the road we could end up seeing him play literally 8 to 10 minutes, it's definitely becoming a little more risky than I think maybe people think. 4 or 5, that's getting closer to 5K there. I know he scored he had a massive game, a really massive game against Maryland. Do we think he has it in him to do something like that again here on the road? It's a great matchup, but do we want to trust Okpara on the road with his foul rate?
I'm going to. He's right now is my top plays for GPP wise. Like, I'm trusting him there, trusting him in a cash game setting, but part of my GPP thinking is most people are going to go with value play at guard because it's that's generally where they are on this slate. But I don't really love forward, outside of the top tier. So I might use one of my value spots on Okpara. I hate the idea of chasing last game. A freshman coming off of a career game or a career type game. I know he had one game better than that earlier this year against, St. Francis. But I don't know. Like, it's still the DVP spot we've been attacking, aside from being on the road, which is annoying, but against UNC on the road, he fouled out in 12 minutes, but still put up 23 DK points. So I don't know. Like, I just feel like it's a strong upside spot, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I guess. But 4-5, it's not going to kill me if he ends up getting 10. I have a chance to make it up with whatever stud combination I go with.
Definitely. And outside of him, there's a bunch of other, potential values that we can look at here. Sean McNeil, who got the senior day start last game, played 34 minutes. Maybe he sees closer to 30 minutes again, sitting there at only 3.9. We know when he's out there, he's definitely chucking. He's not the most reliable option outside of his shot. If it's not falling, he's probably still not going to get there, but it depends on the actual minutes we're expecting him to play. Mr. Isaac Likely playing that defensive stopper role. He had a nice game out there, scored 11 real points. He's at 4K, so we can look at him. Bruce Thornton, who is really, as far as like the freshmen go, Thornton was the one that was really talked about in all the previews and shows and stuff like that, from other sports media. Sensabaugh was the one who kind of, made himself well known and early on in the season and throughout, but now it's kind of flip-flopped a bit. And Sensabaugh, he's still playing well, but Thornton has really looked like he's more comfortable playing confidently, only priced at 5.2. The only thing is the Spartans defense, where we know interior wise, they're pretty susceptible to getting beat up. Their perimeter defense is definitely a little bit more scary. So targeting a younger player on the road like this, even at 5.2, may be a little bit more risky, but he's definitely playing well right now. And I don't hate that price. Suing, I'm still off of, even though I know he's been playing well lately. 7.2. I could see him have a nice rebounding game here against the Spartans, and possibly, if he's hitting shots like he has the last 2 games, getting himself to the free throw line. But 7.2 is just a little bit too much for me on him. And then Sensabaugh, we know the story on him. Never going to play 30 minutes for whatever reason, and that really hampers his upside. He's 8K, so 25 minutes at 8K, he's probably going to get close to 4X more often than not, but we're not getting much upside from him just because of that playing time for whatever reason. I don't know why we don't get him for more minutes, but it is a shame. Spartans, this is a good spot for them as well. Ohio State, like I said, they've, aside from that Maryland game, they've had a rough season, right? Injuries and weird rotations and defensively, and they went on like a million game losing streak there before beating Illinois and now Maryland. Perhaps they're turning it around. They're going to get in the conference tournament and earn a bid. Please, I hope not, but maybe they will. But Michigan State here playing pretty well. aside from that tough game where they lost in overtime and shouldn't have against Iowa, they bounced back nicely against Nebraska, a really dominant win over Indiana. They looked really well, and especially their guard play. I haven't really heard a lot of people talking about the Spartans for a serious March contender, but Izzo, one of the better coaches out there, very experienced, and we know guards are what you need to be able to make deep runs, and they have probably as good as guard group as most anyone out there with AJ Hoggart, Tyson Walker, and Jaden Akins, who has the ability to disappear. We have seen him do that, but lately he's been shooting really well. In that game against Nebraska, I thought was a really telling about where he is at in his career right now, or his ability, because in the first half of that game, he was like a no-show. And usually when that would happen to him, he would be like, well, he got 5 fantasy points, but he fought back and he hit 5 threes and ended with 22 fantasy points. And he's continually hovering around this, 20 fantasy point mark at 5K to 5.4. So even he's been really good for them. And I can definitely see where this Spartans team, depending on their, matchups, their seed, their draw, they could be a little scary team here in March. What are you doing with them against Ohio State?
I want to play one of the guards, but I feel like they're just lightly too expensive, in the spot for upside. I mean, they both could get there, but I'm mainly looking at a little bit of Hauser. And I actually like some, which Scott already told me he was going to contact DK and have him lock my account, so I didn't play Malik Hall. But I mean, senior day, I think he might slide into the starting lineup, which then might get him, 4 or 5 extra minutes. I don't know. I mean, he's going to draw some sensible defense, and by sensible defense, I mean no defense at all. So I just like his upside. If things come together in the spot, I feel like he has a chance to be a sneaky 5.5K play, I guess. And then, Akins at this point it feels pretty safe. But like I said, if I think Hall slides into the starting lineup potentially for Akins, or maybe if he slides in and Hauser plays the 5, I haven't really thought about that too much. Maybe Sissoko slides to the bench. But yeah, Hall and Hauser. Mostly.
I would rather they lock your account for playing Joey Hauser, man. I still am, butthurt about using him years ago, but I think he might be onto something with Hall. It's a good price. The narrative there, being an upperclassman, we have seen Ohio State, without Key, they're starting to, kind of get beat up a little bit down low. We just saw Julian Reese, slow start for him, but he finished with 17 and 12. Coleman Hawkins in the loss to Ohio State, he had 14 and 7. We're seeing, recently here some front court players have some success. So I don't mind that call at all. Might have to look into him a little bit more, because normally when I look at the Spartans, I'm the last season or two, I'm really focused on the guards. But yeah, the prices on them, I think we're paying kind of top ends, especially for Tyson Walker, who I know has been really good lately, but I'm waiting for the bottom to fall out on him at any minute. So I might have to look into that a little bit more. All right, next game on the slate, Seton Hall versus Providence. Kadaria Richmond still carrying the questionable tag, dealing with the back issue. That is a really tricky thing to have happen, because he could go through warmups, look okay, and then all of a sudden, he gets a rebound off where he steps wrong and he tweaks the back, and suddenly he's missing another game. So we have seen Jameer Harris be a benefactor of that, playing 28-plus minutes in 3 straight games, and he actually paid value last game for the first time in those 3 games, so that was nice. Dre Davis, who looked really good in the first 2 without him, and then kind of faded back to just 12 minutes, so a little bit risky there. Femi Odakale, who had a monster game against Villanova. It was the old, you had him in your lineup and then took him out. I know everybody else says that shit, but at 5.4, I kind of waffled on him, and yeah, 41 fantasy points, up to 7.1 now, pretty tough price point. Providence, man, they really gave up some huge scores to Xavier. You don't normally see Providence defense get smacked around like that, especially by guards, but Soli Boom and Colby Jones just did whatever they want. So I think that might be a little on the outlier side, or maybe this Friars, starting group is starting to gas out a little bit from all their minutes. But definitely makes me wonder if Seton Hall guards are somewhat viable here. And normally I would just ignore them against the Friars, but after last game, I'm wondering what the deal is. So how's your feeling on this one?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, we saw Richmond just absolutely torch Providence in the first meeting. Not saying that I'm going to use him if he comes back, because I can't use him off of a back issue at 8.3. Like, I'm just not willing to take that chance. But Odakali, even with that huge price jump, like if he's going to take on like a Richmond type role, stuffing the stat sheet, I do have some interest, just because, like you're pointing out, Xavier guards just did a ton against the Providence backcourt. I just don't think Bynum's that strong of a defender overall. Locke isn't really either. So, I wasn't watching that Xavier game, but I'm fairly certain that Bynum got benched in the first half because getting absolutely torched by Sule. So I don't know. Like, there's still upside in Odakali. I'd prefer him over Dawes, just because Dawes is, straight scorer basically. And they're only $300 different. So that's kind of where I would go. I don't think I'm going to Harris. Like, he's just a bunch of minutes, but yeah, I mean, he got 14 last game, but the 2 games prior, it took 2 games for him to combine for 15. So I just don't know that I want to go there. Plus there's obviously other value or potential value, with A&M around that price point. And a player in the next game that we'll talk about around that price point as well. So I don't really think I'm on Harris.
Yeah, I think that those type of plays I try to stray from, especially when, I do my rounds around, be on the West Coast. I'm at work half the time when the slates start, but I do my rounds and talk to people and get in the chats and try to get a sense of ownership. I know that can be tricky in college basketball, but when a player like this, if I end up thinking they're going to be popular, which I'm not sure he will, but if people try to chase that, I might stray away, even though the 3-4, sometimes on a value, if it's a really good value, I might just say, F it, there's no upside in fading. But on Jameer Harris, more often than not, he's going to be a single digit performer, and put up like an 8 instead of a 14 to 15. So I agree there. And yeah, looking back at least the last maybe 3 or 4 games that the Friars have played, and coincidentally with Bynum, being healthy and out there, they're really lead guards, especially torching them, but they're starting to now the Devin Carter guard, defended guard starting to go off. So there's something to it here with this emerging DVP spot. Throughout the Big East season here, especially recently, it looks like the Friars defense is sprung a leak. So I definitely want to keep tracking this, especially heading into the conference tournament. But Odakale, man, he looked fantastic. So I might have to have some exposure there as well, at least in some of my alt lineups. On the Providence side, I'm really super high on Devin Carter overall. Maybe not so much today, but I just really like his game. And I think he's going to be one of those players that we're using over the next, I think he'll stay and we'll get him again. And he's going to be that 8K, 8.5 guy that's just I'm rostering every slate, putting up 30, 35 and playing for Ed Cooley in that type of role. Not saying it's going to be Bryce Cotton or anything, but man, we know, Chris Dunn, we've seen guys excel in that role, and I think he's going to take over that spot and be really nice next year. So I'm really high on him. I think 8-2 is fine for him, but it's a matchup against Seton Hall that doesn't necessarily make me all that excited, especially with, Bynum. You mentioned he got benched in that first half, but when he's out there, he's taking a tremendous amount of shots away from Carter typically. And we saw in the second half, he ended up paying off and bouncing back after having 6 fantasy points in the first half because he was attacking so much and taking all these shots. So his presence really kind of hurts Carter a little bit, and he's priced a little bit too high for me to consider for a main lineup, I think, right now, even though his floor is fine. Crosswell's been really good lately. If you think he can, juggernaut his way through that Seton Hall front court, which has been pretty strong throughout the season, but even they've gotten a little bit softer. In the first meeting, Ed Crosswell had 21-9 against them. I think they really weren't expecting him or didn't do their homework there because he was just doing everything down low against them. They had no answer whatsoever. And in that game also, Bryce Hopkins had a pretty nice outing. So we'll see if that happens again. I actually really like here, and he only played 4 minutes last game. So, but Clifton Moore at 3-4, if he gets anything close to even 15 minutes, I like his fantasy point per minute when he sees double-digit minutes. I think he has enough, juice to pay off this 3-4 price tag. He is and I can't say for sure if this is the senior night for them. They might have already had it. Probably is because it's a weekend, but Clifton Moore, this is a LaSalle transfer. But this is, I believe, his last year. I'm pretty sure he's a fifth year. He was all the way back in Indiana, 2017, I think, 2018. So I'm pretty sure this is his last season. So we might see him get a token senior day start. And if that's the case, we may see him get 15 to maybe even 20 minutes. And I like his ability to pay off at 3-4 if that's the case. So I'm actually looking there for value potentially, as opposed to paying up for Crosswell and Hopkins, who are both nice options, but I'm not sure I'm going there personally. Is that where you're at with some of your pay-ups with Crosswell, knowing how well they did last time against Seton Hall, or was that too far ago now at this point to derive anything from it?
No, I'm both Hopkins and Crosswell. Kind of debating. Crosswell doesn't seem to carry much for ownership, which I can understand because he's obviously over 8K, and that just seems like a ridiculous amount to pay for a guy that, last year didn't really look all that great in the Big East, but I like the fact that, Hopkins and Crosswell combined for 45 and 19 in that first meet. Like that tells me a lot of how this matchup can go, interior wise. I'm just, honestly, with Providence, I'm just happy that I don't feel forced to have to play Bynum. Like, finally up to 6. Okay? At 6-3 last game, I felt like I just had to jam him in. But now at 6-8, and then in this matchup, I kind of gladly, rolled him off a little bit. And I'm fairly confident I'm going to have zero exposure tomorrow.
Yeah, he's somebody that I've in the past been really fond of, but I haven't found myself, and he's been out a lot obviously, but even coming back, I just haven't found myself too fond of using him. Even outside of that Georgetown game, he just really wasn't somebody that I've been looking at on this roster. But yeah, it's a good point. It's at almost 7K after seeing how chalky he was. I think a lot of people will be now jumping off and perhaps following your lead on one of the forwards there. And then, of course, you always have Noah Locke, who's under 5K. If he's making shots, he's viable. If he's not making shots, he's not. All right, next game on the slate. And there's 3 games on the slate that are really super stackable that I'm super anxious to talk about. But Baylor versus Iowa State, we'll start with this one first. This one has some, on the Baylor side, some injury news to track. Key George with an ankle issue that's come up. He is a true GTD game time decision. So we'll see what happens there. And then Langston Love, who was the popular value, he got not a super gruesome eye injury, but anytime the eyes are involved, it's never pretty. And he's, I don't know what the deal is with his actual status. It's a questionable tag. We'll see if he's able to go or not. But 2, really kind of key pieces there. And I know they still have LJ Cryer and Adam Flagler and other guys, but those are 2, at least rotation players. Obviously, Key George, much more important, potentially gone, which gives us options like Dale Bonner to look at as well, which Dale Bonner's a guy that I typically don't like to roster because I do feel like he's kind of just hanging out. But the last 2 games, he's put up over 20 fantasy points, and he's been taking much more shots, hitting threes, much more active on the offensive end, much more active on the defensive end. A whole new Dale Bonner at this point. So depending on how that injury news breaks, I think, 3-5 Dale Bonner's definitely got to be in our scopes and in our sights and somebody that we have to use. I also always like Everyday John. He hasn't been great his last 2 games, but this game against Iowa State, he will absolutely be needed. Can definitely guarantee a minimum of 20 minutes played, if not more, going up against that Iowa State front court. And they have various Cyclone front court guys that they're going to throw out there. And Everyday John's going to have to, show a little bit of that ability to hit the 3 that he's shown in the recent couple games and get back to hitting the glass. Only 4 total rebounds in the last 2 games. Not aggressive enough. Some foul issues for Texas. I want to see him get back to the way he played against K-State. And I'm very confident in him at 4 7.8K as a guy that nobody is really going to be looking at whatsoever. And I mean, because 20 minutes of everyday John, people just aren't going to project him well. But if you watch the games, and Kutri brought that up, sometimes it pays to really watch the games. If you watch him, you see how active he is. He doesn't need 35 minutes to pay that price off because of how active he is when he's engaged in the game. And I think he will be engaged for this one for sure. LJ Cryer is probably the guy in terms of the non-sub 5K Baylor options that I would be looking at. Bridges has been one that usually is projected pretty well, but I haven't found myself getting there. But with Cryer, depending on how those injuries shake out, he's going to play the entire game. He's going to take 12 plus shots, 8 plus threes. We can get a little bit of peripherals from him. He could be looking at a 35 to 40 fantasy point game at 7K, depending on how things shake out. So he's the one I'd be looking at, even more so than Flagler. You mentioned, Akins being safe. Flagler at this 8.3 price point, he's pretty safe, but the upside sometimes just isn't there to warrant this price. He's much more valuable to me when he's in the mid 7K range. At the 8.3, it's a little bit too much of a premium. However, if Key George is out, maybe I change my thought process on that a little bit. But even then, I'm really not chomping at the bit to play a bunch of Baylor guys against the Cyclones. So for me, everyday John and Dale Bonner would really be where I'm looking. But the Cyclones, they still got that defense, even though they've fallen apart a little bit here. Gale Gross away from the program. There's, a little bit of they sprung the leak also, I suppose. So and you mentioned there's, another guy at the price point you'd be looking at in this game. I'm guessing it's Robert Jones, or maybe it was Bonner, but at 3.3, you have Robert Jones, who's played back-to-back over 20 minutes. Somebody value-wise you could look at against Baylor is their defense hasn't been nearly as good as we've seen, or as elite as we've seen in the past as well. So I definitely think he's viable. And then all the 6K guys that they have, the Gabe Cowshores, Jaron Holmes, Oshuni, those guys are all fine, but they just don't really move the needle too much for me. If I was to use one of them, it would still be Tamin Lipsey. But even he's really kind of started to show his youth a little bit and not take as much of an aggressiveness on offense. He's really good on defense, which is why he gets so many minutes. But I want to see his offensive game improve a little bit more before I'm really paying almost 7K for him in my main. So to me, this game looks like a spot to get value from and maybe look elsewhere for pay-ups. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, Bonner was the one value play at that price point. I just like him because he doesn't have to get shots to get fantasy points, and that's kind of important when he's out on the floor with Flagler and Cryer. Especially with Cryer and him jacking up double-digit threes. Bonner just gets a chance to pick up assists, some steals, and then he also gets some open looks from three. So, if he plays 20 plus minutes again, I really like his floor, and then he's shown multiple times of 20 to 25 fantasy points. So he's the guy that I think, as long as we get the news correct with George and Love out, I think Bonner's the one guy that you just play and look elsewhere. So, I understand that Robert Jones or even Trey King on the other side are on that price point. I just don't know how the rotation's going to go now that they've dismissed Grill. When Grill first missed some games, it was Trey King that stepped up and got the starts and got more minutes. But then now with LJ's come back, and I don't really know what they're going to do. So, and Iowa State on the road isn't a team I like to utilize much. But I will use probably a share or two of Kelsher. He's just going to have to jack up a bunch of threes. Lipsey kind of intrigued me because I do think he's going to have to do a little bit more scoring, but I don't know if the road game is a spot for him either. So, it's kind of a value play only game for me, and then looking elsewhere, really.
Yeah, pretty much in lockstep there. I really like Lipsey too, because I think, he just does so much besides scoring that if he puts that together in part of his game, then he's really going to be dominant next year. The thing with Robert Jones is if he continues to see those 18 to 22 minutes, he just has really strong rates, over 23% usage rate, over 21% shot rate. His offensive rebounding rate is 12%, defensive rebounding rate 16%, comes with a solid, 3% block rate, 3% steal rate, but 6.3 fouls per 40. So on the road, typically that is something that rears its ugly head out when you see a guy who is getting into foul trouble. Going up, I think there's going to be some physicality in the front court on this game. And I think, like I said, Everyday John's going to be looking to do some things, and Robert Jones is out there. It's going to be, a battle for control of the paint there. You don't necessarily think that all the time with this version of Baylor, but I think we're going to see some foul trouble here for one of those guys. Probably going to be Robert Jones here, depending on how friendly that home whistle is. All right, now we get to a game that I am excited about. Not that I wasn't excited about the previous four, but, I'm just one of those sickos that gets excited about Georgia versus South Carolina because there's so many opportunities here for me to bet props, to bet on the game, to get DFS stacks in. It's just two pretty mediocre to bottom tier teams that aren't going to play a lot of defense, and there is a lot of fantasy goodness to go around. So this is a game I want plenty of exposure to. And damn it, I'm going to keep on plugging Terry Roberts into some lineups because he can't continue to get into foul trouble as a guard. I was hoping that coming into this game, his price point was going to drop further like it had. He had gotten down to 6'6" last time he was on the slate against Florida. He ended up getting in, I think it was almost 2 early fouls. So he played 6 minutes in the first half. Horrible. Got his early third foul. Then he picked up a fourth. So he ended up playing 25 minutes. Still had 20 fantasy points. So had we gotten 30, 35 minutes from him, he would have obviously smashed. But we didn't get him to go down the other way, which I was hoping he'd be like 6'2", because I'd really be banging that drum. But they made him 7K, which really all that's going to end up doing is keeping his ownership nice and low for somebody like me that is stubborn enough to continue to throw him out there, because the South Carolina team does not scare me in the least. I just need this foul thing that he's picked up to cease. Since the concussion, he's definitely not looked like himself. He's been a little bit, foggy out there, a little less aggressive like we saw in the Missouri game. He just wasn't shooting shots. But the encouraging thing was that he had 20 fantasy points with just 2 shot attempts because of his ability to, run the offense, find guys. He had 8 assists in that game. And he still contributed, 9 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals in those 25 minutes. It just wasn't the game that we were hoping for. We were hoping for 32 to 35. We got 19 to 20. So at 7K against South Carolina, you don't have to be too afraid. Maybe he's not a main team play. Maybe you just keep him into GPPs. That's fine. But if you're playing like the Q, high dollar, single entry, you're still in a tournament there, I still think he's viable. Rates-wise, 30% shot rate, 30% usage rate, 34% assist rate, 3.5% steal rate. He's not the strongest three-point shooter at 29%, but he's jacking them up. And I think we see a return to aggressiveness here. And he's going up against an opponent that, isn't going to provide much resistance. It's just a minutes thing for Roberts. If he goes over 30, which I'm pretty sure he will, unless he's doing this reaching shit that he's been doing, and he has really been causing some issues there. And he got called for a charge or 2 in that last game. So as long as he's not fouling, this is a fantastic matchup to target him. Definitely. You also have your man Cario Oquendo there at 4-4. This is a nice little value play to target here. Took 16 shots in that game against Florida. Peripherals wise, it's just not there. He's going to score a lot of real points and make value, or he's going to brick all of his shots and not make value. There's just no in between there. He's not going to do enough. He's not going to grab 18 rebounds. He's not going to drop 10 dimes. He's not going to get a bunch of block shots. He's just going to score 20 real points, and he's going to make value. So 2 of his last 3, he's taken 16 plus shots. You have to love him here against South Carolina. Now, with their coach, Mr. Mike White, he is one of those guys, he's like a pass in their light. Sometimes he'll bench guys randomly for no reason, or, he'll have a short leash, or he'll start somebody different. So Oquendo is one of those guys he likes to jerk around, and you'll see 18 minutes to 34 minutes. Then he's at 19 minutes. Then he's at 38 minutes. So he jerks Oquendo around quite a bit. So I can't sit here and guarantee to you that on the road against South Carolina, he'll play 35 minutes. There's a likelihood he plays 12 like he did against Texas A&M for no reason at all. But he should see 20 to 25. And if he does, at 4-4, he's a fantastic option. And this is a great GPP game to mini stack, full stack, whatever you want to do. You can also look if you want to play the, Justin Hill game. He scored 29 fantasy points. That was the game I expected from Roberts, and he benefited from Roberts sitting on the bench for long periods of time with foul trouble. Shot 7 threes, shot 17 overall shots, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, playing quite well. His Longwood Lancers had their season ended today, so maybe they make a run in the SEC tourney. Probably not, but Justin Hill at 5-3 against South Carolina is absolutely a good play as well. So you have some really good options here. And then if you want to go to Braylon Bridges even at 6-7, I think that's fine with the way he's playing. You also have value looks here. I saw Juswan Holt started last game. He played 29 minutes. His fantasy point per minute number is extremely minuscule, very, very low. So there's no guarantee that if he plays 30 minutes again, he'll even make value. But 3.5, he's very cheap. The South Carolina matchup has a way of making guys perform. So I definitely am looking his way if he starts again. Obligatory shout out to my man Moncrief. Minutes are gone, can't use him, but one of these days he's going to break out. I keep saying it'll happen. And then of course Jabri Abdur-Rahim, who's been playing over 20 minutes in the last 3 games. He's got upside here at 3.4. He hasn't shown it lately, but he definitely has 20 to 25 fantasy point upside in a matchup like this. So any of these Georgia guys really that are in the rotation are good GPP plays. And like I said, stubbornly with the rates that Terry Roberts has, I'm just not a believer that, he's not going to be able to pay off here against the South Carolina team. So I'm still going to be heavily on Roberts. And if DK gives me a PRA of 18.5 or 19.5, and I'll check at the end here, I'm slamming the over. I mean, that's just way too easy for me. South Carolina side, we want to definitely target them. Georgia has been really awful. Defensively, they were pretty decent this season, but lately they've clearly started to give up, and we're seeing that. So it starts with Jacoby Wright, who's there at 3.7, another value guy that you can use. And you mentioned you're going to be looking to that, pay ups and value type of lineup, the studs and scrubs. And it's pretty obvious why, because we have all these risky values, but then we have pretty safe minute values, and we have guys that we can be comfortable with. And I think Jacoby Wright is somebody that we can absolutely be comfortable with. He's played over 30 minutes in 7 straight games. This last one, he played 36. Not the highest fantasy point per minute number in the world for those kind of minutes, but he doesn't need to be at 3.7. And the game, I think looking at it like LSU, where he shot 5 of 9, he had 18 real points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. He could do something like that here against Georgia. He got hot in that game against LSU, and he got confident, and he was banging 3 after 3 after 3. And that's something that could absolutely happen against Georgia. I think that's something that likely will happen, and he's going to be one of those values that I think is popular. When it comes down to it, we're looking at, high dollar single entry cash contests. Your opponents, a lot of them are going to have that Javon Quinterly, Jacoby Wright bookended value there in those lineups. So expect to see heavy ownership on both of those guys because of where they project, the minutes they're playing, and the cheap prices that they are. I like, for GPPs especially, Josh Gray at 6.1. Thought I was going to say G.G. Jackson, I'm sure, which I will in a minute. But Josh Gray is a beast on the glass. There's some foul issues from time to time, but this is a really amazing rebounder. Not much for scoring, but you see against Vanderbilt, pulled down 12 rebounds against a team that rolls out Liam Robbins, 7-footer there. Being able to pull down that many rebounds is impressive. He had that game against Arkansas in which he had 20 points and 14 rebounds. Game against the Tolu Smith front court, Mississippi State, he pulled down another 14 rebounds. Last time against Georgia in 23 minutes, 4.6 rebounds. Not the greatest game, but that was kind of pre-explosion. And he's playing a lot more confidently, and he's just an absolute terror on the glass. And I think he can do a lot of damage to this Georgia front court that is one of the weaker teams in the SEC on the defensive rebounding side. Braylon Bridges has played better lately, but I think Gray can definitely muscle him around. So looking at it, here's their rates. His usage and shot rate, not great, but he has the 3rd best offensive rebounding rate in the country, top 45 defensive rebounding rate. Combined rate is over 45 or over 40%. His block rate is damn near 6%. He is got a 5.7 fouls per 40 called rate, so he's definitely got that negative to his game. But 25 to 26 minutes here against Georgia, he could have a 15 rebound game, and only score 4 real points. The 6.1 tag is not super cheap. It's not going to be a lot of safety there to run him in your main lineup or anything, but I think he could definitely be on the GPP optimal in the right scenario, and especially if he can avoid fouls. The Bama game, we saw him just a couple games ago. He played 30 minutes. He didn't make value there, and I believe that one went the extra period. I could be wrong. But he was on the floor doing lots of things. Give him that kind of minutes against Georgia, and he can definitely tear it up. Michi Johnson's been fantastic. High shot rate. He has shown himself this season to be a capable scorer. We saw flashes of that when he was with OSU, and now he's proving it here with South Carolina. 3 of his last 5 games, he's taken 11-plus shots. I like him for GPP. And then the decision here for me will be if I want to just pay the 7-7 for Gigi Jackson in this matchup and use him in my main lineup. He will be likely lower owned. He typically is. People don't tend to roster him very much. He has had some issues with the staff. There was a video going around about how he was trashing the coaching staff, saying that he needed to just get the ball and let him shoot 100 times. And after that, he got pretty much benched against Vanderbilt and then exploded after that against LSU. Looks like he's back in their good graces for now, so expect 30-plus minutes for Gigi Jackson. Very fantastic rates. Last time against Georgia, 18 points, 9 rebounds, 40 fantasy points at 7-7. A really nice option here at home. 30% usage rate, 32% shot rate, shooting about 33% from long range, 17% defensive rebounding rate, and a 3% block rate. Doesn't really get into foul trouble, knock on wood, and he draws almost 5 fouls per 40. That 33% from long range on 160 attempts would come in handy right now for the North Carolina Tar Heels. Just saying. So I'm a big fan of this game overall, Razzle. I'm probably going to be overweight on this game from a myriad of different ways, and even Hayden Brown has some interest in me as the senior here, getting maybe some extra looks, extra minutes there in the final South Carolina home game. So how do you attack a game between 2 bad teams like this?
By stacking it multiple ways, I guess, is the plan. With, the Georgia side, I'm just always going to play Okendo, especially when he's 4,400. Like, I'm just going to play him and hope that he gets back to early season and grabbing 4 rebounds or something to go along with all his shots. It's tough to figure out some of the other guys on Georgia just because some of the minutes just bounce around. I guess most of my preference would fall on the South Carolina side. I think Wright's just a super strong value play overall, and you're probably right in that he is going to be pretty popular, especially playing 30-plus minutes. I may have to look into Gray a little bit more. I just didn't initially like his price point all that much. I kind of wish he was still like 5'5" or 5'4". I do like, Johnson quite a bit. He put up, 18 or 19 shots in the first meeting. So it's really tough to not want to get exposure to the GG or Michi in most of my lineup tomorrow. Especially with them being at home. And then if I'm going to play both of them a decent amount, like I have to consider Brown just a pivot off of him just in case, because he has shown the ability to go for 35. So, and that's what I'm looking for out of a 7-1 price tag for GPP purposes.
Yeah, and he had a big game against Georgia last time too. He put up 35, 36 fantasy points, and he speaking of Hayden Brown, when he was at the Citadel, high usage guy, showed ability to hit threes, just obviously did everything for them. Hasn't, SEC life in the SEC is obviously a lot tougher, but this is an opponent that, and the game went to overtime, by the way. Georgia ended up winning in overtime, but Hayden Brown, 17 points, 10 rebounds, really solid outing for him. Definitely want to get some exposure to him as well, because I think he's going to be the one that I'm forgetting about in my various builds, but I definitely would be upset if I didn't and he went off. So he's on the lower end of the priority list for me when it comes to this game, but at 7-1, he can still pay it off, and has already shown the ability to do so. All right, next game here, Kentucky versus Arkansas. The two main storylines here, Severe Wheeler has some other ailment now, which is keeping him out. And then also Cason Wallace dealing with a lower leg injury. they're saying, oh, he's going to be fine, but his status is in jeopardy here. And it sounds like there's at least a 50-50 chance that he doesn't make it. So there's a bit of news to track for this one because it opens up, even though his price keeps going up, Antonio Reeves, who I know he kind of faltered last game. He started hot, but he still took 17 shots. Important to remember against Vanderbilt, he took that many shots, and that was a bad loss for Kentucky. But if these guys, especially Case and Wallace doesn't play, Reeves may take 20 plus. That's kind of where we're at with it. And on the other side with Arkansas, matchups do matter still. I know a lot of people don't believe that, but they do. And Nick Smith on the road against Tennessee, Arkansas just got jacked, and they did a very nice job. He was 3 for 13 from the field, 1 of 6, kept them off the glass. Very much a struggle for Nick Smith. And I know a lot of people just plugged him in mindlessly at 6'3". He should be a 9K player. Look what he did the last 2 games. Yeah, I know, but matchups still matter. I do think going up against Kentucky and at home, we see him bounce back in a big way. So if people are now going to be fickle and jump off and look elsewhere after what he did, this would be a great spot to now turn around and go right back to Nick Smith because he's still under 7K. Likely to play 30-plus minutes regardless and have an opportunity to put up a 30-plus fantasy point score. So I'm still on board with Nick Smith. I did take a break last slate because of that Tennessee matchup, but he's somebody that I want to look at semi-heavily here, I think, as opposed to anyone else on the Arkansas side, even though I could see somebody like a Devo Davis, who's only 5'6", garner quite a bit of ownership on the Hog side. So what are you doing with this one? Because Arkansas, there's a carousel of value plays. Good luck trying to pick from a game-to-game basis which of them are going to get minutes and go off. And then on the Kentucky side, after a bad loss about Vanderbilt, who knows where their mindset is. So what are you doing with this game? Because you mentioned your stars and scrubs build is might Oscar be the guy that's one of your pay-ups?
Oscar is firmly in play for me. Mostly, he's coming off of back-to-back performances. And one was, against Broome, where to deal with some size, and he still put up just a monster double-double. I think it's kind of gotten to the point where I don't know if he's kind of taken it to heart and decided I'm just going to step up and be the same guy I was last year. We saw a stretch where he just wasn't rebounding the ball, and Toppin and Livingston were both out rebounding him every game. So I think they're going to just put it on his back, especially if Wallace is limited. I know Reeves likes to jack up shots, but they're really going to have to play through Oscar, without a reliable point guard out there. But on the same side, that on the flip side with that, without somebody that can get Oscar the ball, maybe it does hurt him too. I don't know. But I just like the way that he's playing right now. And it's kind of the version of him I thought we would see more often this year. As far as Arkansas goes, being able to play Black at 6,900 is really intriguing to me, because he was over 8K for a little bit. But with Smith back, Black really hasn't done a whole lot. So I'm probably going to be on Smith, and I'm probably going to play some Devo Davis, especially if Kentucky's without a true point guard. I feel like there's a chance for him to pick up some steals, control it a little bit more offensively. He played really well against that tough Tennessee defense last game too. So after he had a couple bad game stretch, so getting him at 56 seems like a nice price point, I guess, to get on. It's just a matter of, if his price point fits more of a stars and scrubs build or not. Maybe it's somebody to pay up for from Javon Quinterly, at 900 more, but makes my build slightly different than a lot of people who are jamming in Quinterly and then going stars and scrubs as well. So I don't know. I haven't played around with builds, but I'm intrigued by going that route.
Yeah, that's a good call. I think it's an intriguing price for sure. And if Kentucky's just low on guards, then yeah, they're going to get hammered in that regard. Now, last time they played back on February 7th, it was an 88-73 win for the Hogs at Rupp. and they didn't have, their prized recruit. Speaking of the Hogs, they did a really nice job on Oscar, held him to 7.7 rebounds, 3 steals, a block, but he played 32 minutes. He just was having a really rough go of it. The Mitchells were frustrating him a great bit. And even Chris Livingston, they did a really nice job on him. It was Cason Wallace that ended up really wrecking them, 24 real points, and he just was the only one that they were allowing to even get any shots up. So we'll see if Arkansas can get that kind of effort going again, because on the road's always a tough situation anyways, but a team that's already shown a ability to slow him down, small sample, but that's what we have to work with. It's definitely intriguing for me, because if Oscar, usually the chalk Oscar slates is when I like to get away from him. But the way he's been playing lately with, back-to-back 50s, it would definitely be a scary fade, to say the least. So we'll see what happens with Wallace's actual status here. I think I like it a little bit better if he plays for Oscar, and if he doesn't, like I said, I'm kind of looking back to Reeves again. He's high enough now at that price of 6'2", and he's above 5'5", 5'8", where I was liking him, that he might be more of a alt team play as opposed to a main team play for me. But I'm definitely going to look his way depending on how that news shakes out. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have the dreaded Tennessee Vols back up on it again. Tough defense, we know, against Auburn. This is a game that doesn't confuse me by any means. I feel like it's going to be a really good one in terms of real life, as they say, and maybe not quite as good from a DFS perspective. I think that we still want to look at Jamal Meshack, who's been playing really, really well at only 4-2. Obviously, Ziegler suffered a really devastating injury in that last game, torn ACL, I think is what it ended up being, which is just a disaster for the Vols, because it seemed like they were turning a corner here and really wanting me to bet on them in the tournament like I always do. But Ziegler being gone, that just really is a devastating thing to have happen. So, of course, Meshack at 4-2, who has been playing the extra minutes with all these guys banged up anyways, like Triple J, Tyreek Key, seems like he's probably in line to play, 30-plus minutes here. So I think he's actually one of the better values going up against this Auburn team. The last time they played, both teams scored under 50. It was very ugly, 46-43. And, of course, the Auburn fans were very, very upset about a late-game whistle that was very questionable. But a low-scoring game, and part of me thinks that this is going to end up happening again, and especially take out, a key piece like Ziegler. That Tennessee offense is probably going to look a little rugged there, or a little less fluid than maybe it normally does. They do have Triple J back in the mix, who did play 29 minutes in that last game. I know he's been in and out and banged up and playing limited, but he looked solid in those 29 minutes against Arkansas, so having him back at least helps. But I think this is a game that I'm truly trying to back away from as much as I possibly can, and maybe limit myself to Meshack, who I think at 4-2 at least isn't as risky as he would be if he'd be like 5-5 or 6K even. And Julian Phillips, who did return to the lineup, played 26 minutes last game at 5-3. I do have a little interest in him. Probably a little rusty, but this is a type of opponent in Auburn that he usually would do well against. So I am kind of intrigued there for him. The Auburn side is a big kind of stay away spot for me. I think people will probably look to KD Johnson, who's still really cheap at 4-5. He put up that 34 against Alabama because Broome just didn't have it going on. I think there was a time when Wendell Green got benched by Coach Pearl there for a stint, and they were just looking for offense for wherever they could find it. And it was Jalen Williams and KD Johnson who provided it. But I think this would be a relatively bad spot to go to KD Johnson in like your main lineup, because this matchup is horrendous for him. And I think the Vols, even without Ziegler, could still slow him down. And we're not starved for value, where we have to play him and grit our teeth and just do it. We have all these other cheapies that we can't use. Whereas KD just makes sense maybe as a leverage pivot in some of those large field stuff, because he can absolutely put up 35 to 40, but he could also put up 3 in this matchup. Rest of Auburn, I'm off. So tell me if I'm wrong there, and who can we play from Auburn, and what else for a game like this that could end up being like 47 to 46.
I'm pretty much with you exactly word for word with Auburn. I will have a share somewhere of Katie, just a lone pivot off of Quinterly or up from Meshach, who I still think is going to carry some ownership too. But yeah, I don't really want to try to guess price points, especially like Jalen Williams, if he was maybe down at 6'2", like I might take a shot at, but just real no interest in that. And Tennessee, I don't know, I'm torn. I think Meshach plays 25 plus minutes, but I think I read that he is expected to be back. I don't know if he pulls some minutes away, with Phillips back and JJJ back. I do have some interest in JJJ, but yeah, I've just been burned by Tennessee in spots that I thought were face up for them. They still come out and score 50. If I wanted to be with some of my build, I guess I could use some Vescovi, the point guard version of him that we got when he came to college basketball. Without Ziegler, like he's going to have the ball in his hands a little bit more. Against the tougher Texas A&M on the road, he put up 44 DK, approached the triple-double. So, like, there's upside in his price. I just don't know if I'm going to get there. Other than to be contrarian, I guess, in, a large field setting.
Yeah, so he after Ziegler went down, he had 14, 6, and 5, so a pretty solid outing for him at that point. 38 minutes, you could expect him to probably play another 36 plus minutes here. So don't mind that, I guess. But I think Meshach is the one I want to use. But I'm very leery. I'm happy that we have options down there below 5K that we don't have to play him in our main if we don't want to, because he's a very fragile, to borrow a term from one of my FTN coworkers. He's a fragile bit of he's probably not chalk, but he usually says fragile chalk, fragile value play that could absolutely just, detonate in our face the wrong way and torpedo the lineup a little bit. So I'm treading lightly with anyone in this game. I just, after watching the first round between these two, I just think it's going to be very physical, and you take a key piece out of the offense, your initiator in Ziegler, and I think the balls may come out a little flat. Honestly, I could see it. The way that Barnes coaches, I honestly feel like the balls are going to come out flat, and that first 10 minutes is going to be like a 9-7 type of score, and I'm just not feeling it. So we might have some under bets in play for this game here in the first half, but for DFS purposes, it's really not looking great for me. Now, there's 3 games I said early on that I really like. One of them was the South Carolina game that is super stackable. The other 2 are this one we're talking about right now, St. John's and Marquette, which is a fantastic, tailor-made, great environment for DFS purposes. And then the Josh Pastner-led Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets going up against BC. That's going to have a lot of fantasy goodness in it as well, because Georgia Tech games tend to be that way. So those are the ones I'm really looking at. So delving into it, I have quite a bit to say about the Marquette St. John's side, but why don't you kick it off and tell us, where your head's at here? Because prices are not necessarily that great for these guys, but we have to get to them because of how good this environment's going to be.
Yeah, total obviously is extremely high, but Marquette team, but yeah, the price makes it a little more difficult. Even though we do have obviously the value on the slate, talked about plenty of it. I always use Soriano. Like I'm just always going that route. So he's in my pool of spend up, especially for my Q lineups. But then I don't really know what to do with St. John's after that. Adewusu, 6x upside against Marquette in the first matchup. So I'm intrigued there. Store could go, 6x plus, and it wouldn't shock me. I'm not a Curbelo fan by any means, but at 4-9, we get a random 6x game from him, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think I'm ever using David Jones at 78 at this point. And I don't really use Posh at 74 anymore. So I don't know. Despite the spot, I don't have a ton of certainty in St. other than Soriano's going to drop a double and get us 35 plus is my, guess. Marquette side, like before I started digging into the slate, I figured I'd just be all about Kolek, which I still am, but he's probably going to fall behind Marquise Noel, who we talk about in a little bit as far as end up at guard. And then I don't like Oso and Cam are at 7,900 seem ridiculously priced. So then do I have to consider Prosper, who had a huge game the first time, but even then it feels like overpaying at 68. So, if I'm using a second Marquette guy, maybe it's Stevie Mitchell at 3,800, who we've seen, recently put up 19 to 20 or 22. But he's just another one of those value guys, sub 4K that could get there for him.
Yeah, it's a confusing one because you know that people are going to run out and stack it up because of the high total. That's typically what happens. And I also want to get plenty of exposure, but and I got into it. The prices just really kind of made me sit back and really have to put the puzzle together a little bit more wisely than can't just mindlessly stack it up because there's going to be some guys who just don't hit value even in this great environment. I'm with you on Soriano. I've been really high on him. I've used him quite often, although recently, the last maybe 3 to 4 weeks of the season, I haven't been plugging him in like I was before. I'm definitely going to be looking to go back to him, though, because the matchup against Marquette is so great. He was over 40 fantasy points against him last time, but this is a Marquette front court that is very susceptible to getting just, walloped. Oso Ighodaro, he's really lean. Guys who are going to get physical down on the glass, they usually do pretty well against this team. They do have Maxence Prosper, who's a little bit bigger in terms of his weight and the way he handles himself. But I just feel like Soriano is just he's too good for what this Marquette defense in the interior is going to be able to handle. So I'm looking for a big game out of Soriano by far, and I'm hoping his ownership will be relatively low because 879K. I just think that people will be looking to some of the other pay up options, which I'm perfectly fine with. So he is the priority play coming out of this game for me on both sides. Now, Curbelo, we talked when he was the 4-5 on that last slate, it was kind of just like a grudgingly like, okay, I got to use him. Played 23 minutes, had 20 fantasy points. So it was fine. Under 5K, certainly, back in play again against Marquette. I foresee him turning it over a lot. So be careful of any props for him if they're available. But, being on the floor for 20 minutes, even against Marquette, is going to give you the opportunity to put up 20 fantasy points or more. So I do like him just because of the cheap price, but I obviously don't think he's a home run play by any means. AJ Storr has been really good. He is coming into his own very quickly. Very highly rated recruit coming into it, very raw initially, but he's developed quite well. And I don't know if that's, just because he's primed to be a probably a semi-star in this league and less to do with, Psycho Mike there. But playing huge minutes, taking double-digit shots at 5'1", he's cheap enough to be considered a value still. When they played Marquette the first go-round, this was really before he started getting those big minutes starting and becoming more of a important piece to the puzzle here for the Johnnies. So I like him. It's only 200 more. I do prefer him over Curbelo personally. So that's where I would go. I am saddened and in agreement with you on Posh Alexander. He was starting to get down in the low sixes, and I thought, shoot, he might hit like 5'7", 5'8", which was the money spot for him when he first started at the collegiate level. But now his price has gone back up, 7-4 after a 30 against UConn. It's tough to use him. I don't think we can, unfortunately, even though the matchup is pretty solid. And then David Jones, kind of the same thing for me there, almost 8K for him. He's played really well lately. The minutes have come back for him after disappearing for a little bit. He had a relatively strong game, 24 fantasy points against Marquette last time. but he's definitely a guy that I'm not going to have a ton of exposure to. I just haven't liked him on this roster. I think, when they brought him in thinking he was going to be the savior, long, 3-point shooter gunner for them, it just didn't make sense then. It doesn't make sense now. So I'm going to be a little underweight on him compared to probably the rest of the field if somebody is targeting St. John's. I think they would look at him over Soriano just for the savings. And then Dylan Adewusu, who at 6'4", has slate breaking upside. He's usually really, really strong play when he's under 6K. The last 2 games, he's been pretty rough, under 20 fantasy points, and one of those was against a middling opponent like the Hoyas of Georgetown. The UConn game, he gets a pass from me because of their tough defense. He did just, was only 3 games removed from putting up 51 against DePaul. Marquette's not DePaul bad, but the pace and the environment of this game definitely will be similar in terms of there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him to get steals, to contribute in the rebounding and assist categories. And if he is, getting hot from long range, he can definitely put up points in a hurry. And in fact, he was just a few points under the 40 fantasy point threshold against Marquette in their first meeting, in which he played 31 minutes, 21 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, hit 3 triples. So I actually like him quite a bit. If it's a situation where you just can't afford Soriano, it's too much money, you can't do it. And I know that, you probably won't be looking in the 6K range if you're doing that studs and scrubs build. But I think playing Dylan Adewusu, even on the road here, in your main lineup is a pretty good move. And I don't think he'll draw too much ownership. And he has been better, actually, on the road. Not by a lot, but he's definitely been performing and taking more of a scoring role on the road as opposed to at home for this Johnny squad. So I think, Soriano, the priority, but then I come down and I look to the AJ Storr, Dylan Adewusu group for them in my main, one or the other. Marquette side, Tyler Kolek, I think at this point at 9-1, it's high. I know he continues to just completely ball out. It's really impressive what Shaka's been able to do for this Marquette team that I don't think anyone really thought they would compete the way that they have. He had 32 against St. John's in their first meeting. I think at 9-1, we really need him to continue hitting that 40+. I still have it in my head that Posh, with his, his perimeter defense and his on-ball defense, they throw him over there on Kolek or even Adewusu, who gets physical. Like, that could definitely limit some of the upside we're used to seeing from Kolek, at least recently. Maybe, the shots aren't there like they have been. Maybe they force him into some additional turnovers. So I am thinking that his numbers could take a hit here going up against that St. John's team. And if he hits, he'll probably still hit 30 because of his playing time. But at 9-1, right, we're looking for 40+ in those large field tournaments with him. We're paying an all-time premium high for Tyler Kolek at this point. I'm not going to chase the performance from Prosper in that St. John's game. It feels so long ago at this point, and it was a couple months, right? And he's probably going to project fairly well overall because this is such a great matchup for him. But, man, I can never trust Prosper. It's so hard to, and now asking me to pay almost 7K for him, there's just no shot. So if I can't get to Kolek and I'm not trusting Prosper, that leaves me with just a handful of options here. You mentioned Stevie Mitchell. I think that is a very wise decision. 3-8. I don't know why he dropped. I know they had 8 against Butler, but before that, 3 straight games over 19 fantasy points. Doesn't really warrant being dropped to 3-8, so that's a little puzzling. His minutes are kind of hovering in that low 20s range, which you'd like to see them go a little bit higher. Chase Ross has been a nice quality bench piece that saw his minutes over the prior 3 games start to dip, but then he came back up and played 15 against Butler, and those minutes come directly out of the Stevie Mitchell pool, and especially when we see, Joplin come in there, and I know he's kind of a tweener guard forward, and we see him play like 20 to 25 minutes. That also negatively impacts Mitchell to a degree. And then we were even seeing Sean Jones for a bit there come out and play 12 to 15 minutes, which also comes out of that pool for Mitchell, because Kolek's just not going to leave the floor. And Cam Jones, as he's shooting and scoring, he's not going to really lose those minutes either. It's going to come directly from Stevie Mitchell. So it really depends on what Shaka is going to do with his rotation. But at minimum, we're looking at 20 minutes for Mitchell. And in this matchup against St. John's, he's not a big enough offensive threat that they'll throw their best perimeter defenders on him. So he has that opportunity to hit 20-22. He put up 21 against them last time. He hit a three. He had 3 rebounds. He did just enough. At 3.8, I think he's actually probably in the top 3 or 4 values for me. And I wonder if people, will kind of maybe not necessarily overlook, but as they're plugging Quinterly in and Wright in and depending on what they're going to do, how many studs they actually need, Mitchell just might end up being a little bit lower owned than those two and being a just as good of, if not better play. Because 20 fantasy points at 3.8 makes him a home run, basically. Cam Jones is a GBP play all the way at 7.9, high shot rate. He has found his shot again, I think. I know Butler, he kind of struggled there, 4 of 11, but the prior 2 games, he was hot against Creighton, hot against DePaul. This is a good matchup for him against St. John's. Love him for GBP, but it's a high price, admittedly. There's not a ton of upside there because of his reliance on scoring. I do think Iguodaro is a nice little, alt team play as well. It's probably okay to run your main because of his safe floor too, but I don't think he's going to see the kind of rebounds that you need from him at almost 8K in this matchup. Against them last time, he had 4 rebounds, 22.5 fantasy points. He's just going up against a grown-ass man in Joel Soriano that's not going to allow him to do much in the paint. Iguodaro is somebody who is, capable of pulling down double-digit rebounds, but I just don't like this matchup as much for him as I do some of the other guys. So had he been like 6K or something, I think it would be a different story. But 8K, you're just asking me to use him in a spot that's maybe not the greatest for him. Unless Soriano gets into foul trouble, then it becomes a whole different story. All right, moving on, we have Virginia. I still probably don't remember, Razzle, but a couple years ago when you would come on and it seemed like it would always be a Virginia slate and it'd always be like, man, Virginia. But then, you kind of prided yourself on finding these little trinkets and these nuggets of plays and information in Virginia games. And you got pretty good at it. And, you made that statement about, Virginia's in these slow pace, ugly games all the time. That's just the way they play. So you can't just always write them off the slate when they're on it. And I thought that was a really intelligent thing that you said, and it stuck with me. And I still reference that from time to time. So we have Virginia. We have Louisville, really rough Louisville team that is not very good whatsoever. It's been a tough season without guards. Who would have thought? They pressed Virginia in their last game time. Was it like mid-February? They nearly beat them and gave them a really good game. I don't think they'll do that here on the road, but I guess you never know. Sometimes in March Madness, anything can and will happen. So give us your Virginia analysis here on this really, probably a throwaway game. But like I said, you've been pretty good about finding some little trinkets or nuggets of play. So what do you got for us?
Yeah, normally I like digging the Virginia games to find that play that works out because you generally get them, at 3% ownership. But on this slate, I just think this game is ultimately a throwaway game. I can't really trust anybody on Louisville. We know LLS is going to jack up shots, but I'm not paying 8,100 for him on the road, in Virginia. Like I'm just not doing it. I always get suckered into Withers, but his price is up to 6,500, and he's coming off of a terrible game. And there's just games where he just randomly commits goals, like he just doesn't want to be there, in the first 5 minutes. So I think if you wanted to be different, you can probably play JJ Traynor the way that he's been playing of late at 5,400. He's probably not going to hurt you at all. And against the tough, Clemson interior, he put up 37 DK. So if I'm forced to play a Louisville guy, that's what it is. Thankfully, I'm not forcing myself to play. On the Virginia side, I don't really know. Like Beekman's aggressively priced, more of a strong floor play upside at this point. Gardner's probably the one that's been flashing the most upside, so he's certainly in play. But he wasn't all that great against Louisville the first matchup, and despite Louisville being not very good, they at least have some length, to where I think that gives Gardner a little bit of trouble. Clark's another guy that's a strong floor play, but I just don't know that he's, going to go for what does he need? 33 plus, to get for my GPP value is what I'm looking for. And he's basically done that, I don't know, twice for sure, maybe 4 times total on the season. So like I'm not expecting him to do that. I mean, maybe Franklin gets hot again, like we saw him, go through a ridiculous stretch at the beginning of conference play. But, the way that he's been recently, it's been nowhere near paying off GPP-wise for me. So, like, just nobody I really feel like I have to jam in. I mean, Dunn's coming off of a strong game, but I don't really want to predict him going 7X, especially in a game that, like, I think Virginia kind of cruises to a win. So, yeah, it's going to end up in a throwaway game for me. I wish I could gamble on, like, Shedrick or something, who I've got right multiple times in the past, especially earlier this year, with him being all the way down to 3K, but he's just not playing any minutes now.
Yeah, it's crazy how Shedrick and Cafaro, who, less Cafaro, but had games last year where they, blew up, and this year coming into it, you would have thought they'd play more, but they have not factored in at all. Cafaro as a senior, Franklin a senior, Clark a senior, so I don't know, if they'll have a little extra pep in their step, if they'll give Cafaro more minutes, but yeah, it's really tough to trust any of those guys. And like you said, the price on, I love to play Beekman. Like, this is a matchup that I think he could definitely do well in. He was awful against Louisville the first go around, though, like very passive. But they've got him priced so high, I just can't. Like, the second he went above 30 fantasy points, they immediately jacked his price up. And I'm a big Beekman guy, but I have to, come to terms with it myself and say that there's no upside there for him. I was watching part of that Virginia game against Clemson, and because I started seeing Ryan Dunn do all this stuff, so I was like, let me turn this on the stream and see what's up. And he just went through this stretch, like 4 or 5 minute stretch, where he couldn't miss. He was getting easy buckets. He was getting putbacks. He got a steal. He blocked a shot. It was like, holy hell. I even tweeted about, like, Ryan Dunn is going ape. And then, the second half, things kind of went back to normal, and he didn't play a whole lot. So that's probably more of an outlier, this season. I think Dunn's going to be a guy that really ends up playing a lot. I think, honestly, he's going to be a stat sheet stuffer type of play. And if he develops a 3-point shot, he's going to be really good. Maybe toss him out there in 1 or 2 lineups, at 3K, doesn't have to do a lot. For me, I still like overall long-term and short-term Isaac McNeely. I know he hasn't done a whole lot, but he's a guy that they spend a lot of time developing, helping him with his 3-point shot. Like, I don't think Coach Bennett's going to put all this time into him not to use him. And I think that getting up here for, the tournament, and Virginia's really susceptible to their offense just lagging. And if they run into a team again, a couple of years ago, that's hot from deep, they won't be able to keep up. So a guy like McNeely, they need, because he has that ability to knock down threes. And when he's out there, he has been given the green light. 12 attempts in his past 3 games. His minutes dropped against Clemson, but it actually was one of his better games, go figure, that he's had in a while. Shot 4 for 6 from the field, had 12 real points, over 13 fantasy points. So I like McNeely. This price has dropped. It was almost 5K, which was unplayable, but they've dropped him back down to 3.6 and going up against Louisville. I think we could see him maybe touch, close to 30 minutes here, especially if it gets out of hand. Getting him those, valuable minutes here heading into the 1-game season, if you will. There's no tomorrow type of situation. Getting him those reps and those shots and that confidence is really important. So I do think McNeely is a little bit of a sneakier value that people are going to, pass over because of all the other options. But other than that, there's nobody in this game that I think makes all that much sense. There's, Kamari Land's getting minutes at 3.5. He did have 14.5 fantasy points against Virginia the first go around, but you're really dumpster diving there. And then Sidney Curry, who I think he already had his cap for the season. He has like 2 or 3 games a year where he's just unstoppable. And then he's what he is right now, barely playing and scoring less than 10 fantasy points. But at 3.2, kind of interesting, I suppose. All right, moving on. We have 3 games left. Kansas State versus West Virginia. You had mentioned Marquise Noel. Sounds like he might be one of your favorite pay-ups going up against this West Virginia team. It's definitely a matchup that I could see him doing some devastating things too. We know that he put up almost 60 against them last time, 23, 3, and 10. I think, 7 steals. We know K-State, they've been better at home, but they looked very good against Oklahoma State. Actually, I think it was last week we were just talking about them, me and you. Marquise Noel was somebody against Oklahoma State that I ended up having a lot of just because I didn't like some of the other options in his range. And I have noticed that even though overall as a team they've been worse on the road, he's been somebody who's taken on more of that offensive load besides just passing and setting his teammates up. He's taking more shots. He's looking to be aggressive. He's averaging almost 40 fantasy points in road games. So I definitely am on board at 9.5. Might seem like a higher price to some, but I think I'm with you. It sounded like you were on him as well. So what's up with Noel and everyone else in this game?
Yeah, I mean, like you're pointing out exactly why I'm big on Noel. Obviously, the last matchup against them, I'm not expecting 56 fantasy points again. I'm not expecting 7 steals. But just his road numbers, you mentioned the nearly 40 fantasy points. His overall field goal percentage is lower on the road, but he's taking more shots. He's taking more threes. He's getting to the free throw line more on the road. So I like seeing that from lead guards. And I don't remember what the line was in this game. But what we do know is, close games late. West Virginia is actually favored, but I don't necessarily trust them to win. So if Kansas State has a small lead late, like Noel racking up free throws, he took 13 free throws in the last show. Only took 2 last game against Oklahoma, but the 2 previous games he had 10 in each of those. I feel pretty good about him from both a floor and a ceiling standpoint. So he's, the more I sit here and think about it, the more likely he is to be my number one spend up option on this slate. Just because I think most people are going to spend up at forward because of the value being mostly at guard. But yeah, I don't know. I like Key Johnson on the road, but at 84, I don't know that he's got the upside in him right now. The last time he reached GPV value at this price point was against Kansas a month and a half ago. I've made some notes, side notes within my notes or within the Discord community about how I think that he's kind of hit a little bit of a wall. Dealing with the health thing that he dealt with at Florida, and finally being cleared to come back. It had been a long road. So it just looks like he's not rebounding as much, right? Like his rebounds are way down over the last month and a half. But he's also not getting to the free throw much either. In fact, he hasn't gone to the free throw line at all in the last 2 games, which is, kind of shocking for a guy that's, that aggressive and getting that many shots off. So I don't know that he's somebody I want to pay over $8K for at this point, even though one of my favorite players in college basketball. So, with the rest of the Kansas State team, it's tough to choose. I'm not chasing a Desi Sills game that was just ridiculous last time out. Like a game I never would have expected to see him put up. Maybe like Cam Carter intrigues me a little bit, I guess, at 35. He's got 15 plus in 3 straight games. Against Baylor, he went 8.5. So there's upside, but he's just another guy in that range where we've talked about a bunch of guys that I think I would prefer to play over him. And the issue is a lot of those guys are earlier value plays, so we can't pivot off of them to Carter. Trying to be different. If the situation arises, because those other guys are going to be locked in. So I don't know. Carter's not really going to take a whole lot of shots, but he's going to grab some rebounds, maybe pick up a steal or two. But the West Virginia side, I'd never know who to play. Stevenson can come out there just absolutely chucking, but I don't really want to pay $8,400 for him, so I'm going to have to pass. Trey Mitchell went off against him the first matchup, but I have a bad taste in my mouth because I was all about him last weekend, and he put up 6.5. And then his price went up, so I don't know if I can do that to myself again, even though I try to convince myself that I need to go back to a guy the very next game after he's left. But I just don't know if I can do that. I guess Keegan Johnson kind of makes sense to me if you're going to go with a more balanced build at 65. Has shown enough upside and has been decently safe, but again, it's something I'm making a priority. Toussaint, I mean, he could put up 4 or he could put up 35. You don't really know what you're going to get out of him. You don't really know what you're going to get minutes-wise either, right? He played 11 minutes against Oklahoma State, picked up 4 fouls. If he's out there with Noel, who's to say he's not going to pick up 4 fouls in 12 minutes again? So he's just another value guy around that price point of where we have a bunch of value guys. Mashak is a better value play than Toussaint is. So, I'd rather just go that route and not worry about, whether Toussaint's going to play 12 or 25 minutes. But I don't know. This is a game I kind of was interested in hearing what you had to say about it, because I feel like I should on it more. West Virginia has a team total of 77. So, they're expected to put up points, but when I look at them, I just don't know that there's anybody I want to go to, similar to the Marquette St. John situation.
Yeah, and they're what, decent 5-point favorites. They're a team, they can put up points, but it's frustrating because it's usually Stevenson because he's chucking so much, which I'm just not a Stevenson guy. And then it'll be a random, it'll be Trey Mitchell or it'll be Keegan Johnson, or we just saw Toussaint. So it's really difficult, and it's obviously a great spot to target them because of the matchup. It's pretty tasty. It's a good game environment. It was pretty frustrating because this was last slate against Iowa State was pretty much the first time I didn't have 1 or 2 lineups with Toussaint in it, just because he's been so cheap and his rates are so great. And of course, he explodes against the Cyclones, which I never would have thought in a million years. So hit 3 triples at 4-3. I think we'll see some people go back, not go back, but use him or chase that, if you will. It's just, like you said, the minutes wise, if it's a situation where we can be confident that he's going to play 20 plus minutes, then yeah, at 4-3, I think he does become maybe not the top value or even top 3, but he's probably in the top 5 or 6 value spots. If he's playing 20 plus minutes. If he's getting, 12 minutes, then it becomes a different story. And even though he has fantastic rates, and you look at it, his usage rate is 25%, shot rate's 25%. He has a 24% assist rate. He's shooting 32% from long range. He's drawing 6 fouls per 40. He's getting himself to the line, but he does have a bit of a foul problem himself. His fouls per 40 for him is 4.5. And you brought up a good point. There's been 3 straight games where he's had 3 or more fouls, and that has definitely affected some of his playing time. And he's even fouled out in under 25 minutes a handful of times. So going up against a backcourt, or more specifically Marquise Noel, if he has that assignment, he's going to probably run into some trouble. And that was the case at Kansas State. The first time he fouled out in under 20 minutes. He played, let me pull it up real quick, 17 minutes. He had 7 fantasy points. He fouled out and played 17 minutes. And going back and looking at that, I haven't looked at the whole entire game, but I would probably assume that he probably was on Noel for some of that and picked up some fouls there. So it doesn't make me feel very good, even at home, going back to him. I will definitely still have some, but there's no way I would be placing him in my main team anymore. I think I'm past that point with him. Now there is some injuries to possibly look at here, and they're not major injury issues to major players, but James Okonkwo, who's been playing maybe 15 minutes per game on average, has an ankle issue. So, that's, if he's out, that's at least 15 minutes to go around for the Bells and the two Saints and, some of those other guys. Mo Wag, who's playing maybe 5 to 8 minutes. That's another, those all add up really quick. So there's going to be the opportunity, I think, for a small ball lineup to go out there and two Saints to play 20 to 25 minutes. Whether he'll make it there because of fouls is another story, but I think the opportunity will at least be there for him. So I do like it to a degree, but it's just a GPP play for me. I don't think he's in, there's no longer playing him in my main, and that doesn't necessarily mean cash. That just means whatever lineup I'm playing the most money on. I do think at 3-5 Jimmy Bell without Okonkwo, he sees a nice little spike in minutes, possibly getting him to the 25 to 26 mark. Now, earlier on in the season, his fantasy point per minute total was actually pretty decent. That was mostly in the non-con. He became a non-con hero very, very quick once the Big 12 season started. So he hasn't had that same level of success, but we did see against an Oklahoma State front court, 4 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals. At 3-5, 23 to 25 minutes projected without Okonkwo, he could pay that off. He's not going to shoot very much, and that's part of the problem, but he doesn't need to. He could pay it off with his peripheral category. So another GPP look there. I'm never using Emmett Matthews, and I'm not hating guys that left the Huskies. It probably looks like that because of Stevenson and Matthews, but Matthews is just never really paying any. I mean, 6'5" for him is a no-go. 5'5" for him is usually a no-go. He's just not doing enough offensively through the course of his career to really warrant being a DFS play ever. And then Eric Stevenson at 8-4. Like, I usually take his unders. He's beaten me a little bit on the unders, but I begrudgingly take them because they're so high for him. And I think, the fact that he's taking 20-plus shots is completely ludicrous, and he gets away with it because he's very inefficient. But I won't be using him either. I like your guy Trey Mitchell, though. I think at 6'9", he's got some upside, some juice there. I think he could definitely pay off. He's got to keep his head in the game. He had a very nice outing against them, 16 points and 13 rebounds on the road last time. So I think there's something to that he could have a nice little game here once again. Kedrian Johnson, I think, I agree, main team viable at 6'5". He has enough, enough of the offense comes to him to where he can pay off a sub 7K price point and give us some other, options there. The K-State side has some good front court players, though, so I do think Mitchell is maybe not a main team play by any means. David and Gesson, we're seeing him play some good minutes in the front court for K-State. He's decent. We're seeing Nate Tomlin, start to own the glass again and contribute. He had over 29 fantasy points against Oklahoma. He's had some pretty nice outings recently, 4 of his last 5 over 20 fantasy points. And in the first matchup against K-State, again, that was on the road. Did he not play that one? Okay, I thought I was guessing that missed that one, but I guess maybe he missed it. But he's starting to play well. He's a JUCO transfer. He has a very high rebounding rate, and he's been able to, I think, like you said, Key Johnson's hit a little bit of a lull. He's not being as aggressive. I'm seeing a little bit more of a passive Key Johnson. I noticed it against Texas. I had a lot of him in that game, and watching it, he just wasn't attacking like before. And we're seeing Tomlin, who was really good in the non-con at doing so, start to really hyper-focus on the glass as a shot blocker, and they're starting to get him the rock a little bit more. He's contributing because he is a adequate enough scorer down low that he can put up some points. So not necessarily thinking that Tomlin's a great DFS play, but it does speak to your hesitance to use Key Johnson as a GPP play or a main team play. It just kind of seems like he's stuck at 28, maybe 30 fantasy points, and at 8-4. That's just not doing it for us, So I'm on board with Noel. I love using him. I think, he's going to have the ball in his hands so very much, all over that. I agree with you. Desi Sills is a total chase. Look for him to probably drop back down to that 15 to 16 fantasy point mark. 6'2" is just way too high. And on the West Virginia side, there's going to be 2 or 3 guys that come out of here making value, not necessarily torching it, but making value. And if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably Toussaint, who I still believe in, even though I'm not using him in my main, Kedrian Johnson, and then Trey Mitchell, who I still really like. Stevenson and Matthews just, I don't know. They don't do it for me. But it's a game that can get you in trouble, and it's a game that I think we could see like an 85 to 82 type of score. You're like, oh, wow, a lot of guys, went off in this game. And then you open up the box score and you see like, 2.5x, 3x, 2x, 1.5x. Like, where do all the points come from? And it could just very well be Noel versus Stevenson. And those are the only two guys that did anything. So be aware of that. All right, moving on, we have Georgia Tech versus BC. This is a game I hate walking into to being pass nerd, but it feels like that might be what happens to me because I'm very interested in this game on both sides. Now, Davon Smith dealing with an ankle issue, missed some time. We'll see what happens there. He's got an official questionable tag. The Georgia Tech Syracuse game was not on the slate, and it's too bad because I would have definitely been all over the Georgia Tech side, even though I hate them, because we know how bad the Syracuse defense has been all season long. Miles Kelly put up 30 real points. Javon Franklin, he had a triple-double, 14 points, 10 assists, and I think was a 15, 16 rebounds, something crazy like that. So Franklin has just been playing so well the last month and a half of the season. As an up transfer, his price has come, of course, way up. He's 8.5 now after putting up 62 against Syracuse, 46 against Louisville, 44 against Florida Tech. They had that weird non-con game in the middle, and 42.5 against Virginia Tech. So a variety of opponents there that he continues to produce against. The Boston College side of things, while they're probably better defensively than Syracuse, but not by much. The front court of BC, with Bickerstaff there, he's a fouler. Quentin Post likes to, step outside and hit threes. He will get rebounds, but lately he's been getting pushed around. And he's also still having the lingering effects of a severe flu. So I think Franklin could absolutely eat here again. And every time I keep trying to write him off and say, well, this is the price that's too high for me, he just keeps on producing these games and contributing. And he doesn't necessarily have to score 20 real points to do so. He had 42 against Virginia Tech, which we know defensively they're pretty tough down there, with 10 real points, 5 blocks, 3 steals, 10 rebounds. 42 with 10 real is not an easy feat to accomplish, and he does it quite often. So I think I'm on board with using him as well. I don't know how much the rest of the industry will be on a Pastner player. I don't want to sit here and say that he's now past the point of being yanked for no reason, because just when we think that could happen, Pastner could say, you know what, you're going to get 8 minutes today. It really could happen. We saw him put up, let me go back. There was a game I remember vividly. He had put up like 45. It was against Notre Dame, another zone defense. He put up 43 against them, 12 and 12. The very next game against Pittsburgh with no foul issues, he played 6 minutes. So I don't know that Pastner is immune to doing that to us tomorrow, but I am definitely on board with using Franklin. With all these values, you're starting to make me feel like the studs and scrubs route might be the way to go, because I'm not feeling like the mid-range is all that strong, honestly. This slate's kind of weird. We have those 3 really marquee fantasy games, a couple of decent ones, and then a lot of defensive battles, honestly, and that mid-range has quite a few of those defensive battle players in it. So I think Franklin and Noel together could actually be kind of fun. I think both of them could combine for a very huge score, maybe even 100 points or more. It just feels really bad playing a Georgia Tech player at 8.5, but the way he's playing is ridiculous. I can safely get away from Miles Kelly at 7.1. I like Miles Kelly a lot. He's been a dude that I've had in various dynasty leagues, and he's playing well lately. And the minutes have been there for him. He tends to be a little bit more reliant on scoring, although he has been contributing in other categories lately. But the 7.1 price point against a BC backcourt defense that's adequate enough, I feel like that's an okay spot for us to fade and get away from. Instead, I want to look to, like I said, Franklin. Kyle Sturdivant has, I don't know if I can go there either. He's 6K now, but he did play really well against Syracuse. He played really well against Louisville. So we have to at least consider him with the high fantasy point per minute number he's been putting out against those opponents. But I also don't want to get into the situation where I'm playing multiple Georgia Tech guys in one lineup. Definitely not, but let alone, in multiple lineups. So I might try to make all of my exposure to Franklin with all his value we have, maybe a smidgen of Debo Coleman, because I think he's better than what we've seen from him, and maybe a little bit of Lance Terry, but I'm mainly going to be on Franklin here against his BC front court that I think is beatable for his skill set. On the BC side, this should be a great spot to target them as well. Georgia Tech gives up plenty of fantasy points themselves, but we're not getting super great prices on some of the top end guys. So Quentin Post at 8.2, it's an okay price for him. He didn't start, ended up playing still 29, 30 minutes. So wasn't a big factor, but definitely didn't look like himself. He was very sick. And he's only been over 30 minutes once in the past 4 games. He was right at 29 last game. And he has only been over 24 fantasy points once in the last 4 games. So definitely a get right spot to target Post, but I do think he's hit a little bit of a wall here, or teams are just really focusing on defending him. McCall Ashton Langford at 7.3 is too high for me. Jaden Zachary, who's been playing really well lately, his price is up to $6K. That to me feels like a letdown. Even though it's a great matchup, I just feel Zachary's got one of his torpedo games in him, so I'm going to tread lightly there. Even if DeMar Langford ends up being out again, I'm very uncomfortable with Zachary. I'd rather maybe go to Devin McLaughlin, who was horrible last game against Wake Forest, but should still see the minutes as a 15 to 20 minute starter at minimum. Prince of Ligby at 4.5 is an interesting GPP play for me because his minutes haven't gone anywhere. His production has gone south since Post has been back, but he's still on the floor playing lots of minutes, and he is very, very cheap. TJ Bickerstaff, who completely fell out of the rotation, played 21 minutes last game, but I think that had a lot more to do with the fact that Post was sick. So we'll see if he ends up, getting the start here, depending on what's going on with Post. But if he doesn't, we probably can ignore him. He's 3.7. It's interesting. Maybe, what is this, the last BC home game? Maybe they give him some additional minutes at 3.7, maybe throw him into a lineup or two. But he just hasn't been very good this season as opposed to last year. And then I think that might be it. Chaz Kelly, who I liked as a freshman, his minutes have gone to the south as well. So I'm really not as high on this game as I maybe thought I would be initially. This was one I thought I'd be stacking. But prices, opportunities, rotations, and just an overall discomfort, a very high discomfort level with most of the players on both of these teams. So I don't quite know how to attack BC in this one, but I know that I'm probably playing Javon Franklin, and I know that I'm probably going to regret it after it's all said and done. So what's your plan with the Josh Pastner-led Yellow Jackets and a BC team that's kind of just mediocre? Did I lose you? Where'd you go? What happened?
My phone kicked me.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I didn't see that.
No, it's all right.
All right.
Yeah, like listening to you talk about G Tech, like I've been on Franklin all year long. Non-con wise, all the ups and downs. I've just played him. So I've lived through the bad spots, so I'm reaping the benefits now, and I'm going to continue to play him. He is somebody that I initially was going to force myself to jam in on this slate. So I heard you mention Noel and Franklin, and that's pretty much my 2 initial spend ups in my first look build. I think there's the guards on Tech are all playable. Like I don't know that I want to have to pick. It's tough to look at the last game because we know Syracuse just gives up 8 billion 3-point shot attempts. So they all had a chance to go off. So I don't know, like I just won't prioritize any of them, and I'll just I guess end up on one of them depending on what price point I end up with left, because I will have a mini game stack of this, in some places, just because I also, I love attacking the Tech defense as well. So I've been on Post quite a bit. I've been off recently, so I've kind of coincided with him kind of bottoming out a little bit, but it seems like a spot where he could kind of bounce back as long as he's 100% good to go now from his illness. Like he could bounce back for a 20-12 type game, especially against the zone. So I don't like Ashton Langford seems pretty safe. I'm a little hesitant paying 7,300 for him. But he does have back-to-back 32 pluses. He has 32 plus in 5 of the last 8 and 7 of the last 11. So I guess he's been consistent enough that I shouldn't be worried about 7,300, but I still am. Zachary just feels more like of a strong floor play. A lot of times he's not used a ton offensively, just kind of does a little bit of everything. Can get there occasionally, but for me, it's just spending up for BC. So I don't really want to guess on all the other pieces, just because I just don't think they're strong enough, at least on this slate, for a 12-game slate. Because we have plenty of other value. I don't need to play that game and try to get them correctly. And it's not like they're an elite team where I feel like I have to guess them correctly because other people are going to be on them. So even if one of the cheaper guys on BC goes off, he's most likely going to be so low owned that I don't think it's going to make or break a slate. So really it's just spending up in this game.
Yeah, and even last game for BC without DeMar Langford, they played 9 guys 10-plus minutes. So the rotation is still deep enough. You took a guy out with an injury, and they still are running this deep rotation, which it ends up just being a bunch of 15 to 20 minutes for, Aligby, McLaughlin, Madsen, Kelly, Pena. So you're right. It's just not really worth it because they're all just cannibalizing each other. Ultimately, one probably will come out, but, at such a low ownership of 2%, it won't really matter in the end. And you'll end up with a lot of dead lineups trying to figure out who that might be. So I'm in agreement with you on that. Last game on the slate here is TCU versus Oklahoma. It's finally time for, unfortunately, me to stop throwing Joe Bamasiel into an alt build because the minutes are just, they're not there. He's back in the, I think in the K-State game, especially, he just couldn't guard anyone and he just couldn't play. So we're back there with him. Unfortunately, and TCU has a couple of guards that I think he's probably incapable of guarding. So can't use my man, Joe. I wish, I don't want to see him transfer again because he's already done it like 2 or 3 times, but I don't know if he's in the right spot for his skill set. But I think we can look at Otega Aui at 3.7. His price has continued to drop. Milos Uzan is up to 5.5 because he is really starting to look good. He had that mid-season where he was just, such a strong play, came out of nowhere seemingly, and then kind of fell back into the background. And now he's really become a key player for them again and playing quite well on both sides of the ball. And you're seeing him play heavy minutes. Aui played 26 minutes against K-State. He also got pretty hot on he didn't shoot any threes or anything, but he's a driver most part, and he got to the bucket with reckless abandon time and time again against K-State and looked really good. And he's adequate enough on defense, better than Joe B at least, to where he's going to continue to get minutes. So at 3.7, he's actually kind of interesting. You can throw him into that value pool. We've got quite a bit. It seems like we've got like 15 to 18 values under 5.5, 4.5 to 5K. That you could probably talk yourself into using in various formats. So Aui definitely, is in that pool for me. I think Uzan is still fine. He's even at 5.5. He's kind of like that Jamal Bay, cash play for me, where he's in the mid 5K range. The minutes are there. He's not super sexy by any means. The 32 is nice, but he's typically going to be somewhere between, 18 to 22, relatively safe. So I think you can use him in this matchup against TCU if you want to. Grant Sherfield, every time I see him under 8K, I always think to myself, man, he's so cheap, got to use him. But shit, he is just not performing whatsoever. He had that 43 against K-State back on Valentine's Day, got them again on the road on, just a couple of days ago and just not performing, playing all the minutes in the world, but just not performing. It's really tough. I think it's getting harder and harder to justify playing him even at these cheap prices for his actual skill set. He has gotten monstered. I know it's tacky to say that nowadays, but they stole his ability. You had mentioned Jalen Hill in the last, I think think it was you last time we had Oklahoma on the slate. There, he's okay. I think at 6'7". I think the one I'd want to play the most on this team is Tanner Groves at 7'1". I think he could do some damage here because the minutes are generally safe for him. He got in some foul issues with K-State there last game, which is why he fell off. But before that, 29 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. So I do think that Tanner Groves is in a position here where he could play quite well against TCU. On the TCU side, we saw Lampkin come back. I don't believe he started, but he played 16 minutes off the bench. And that was enough to throw things off on my man, Jacoby Cole. So I've been very high on over the last maybe 2 or 3 weeks. High fantasy point per minute player, high usage rate, high shot rate. But with that, he only played 16 minutes against Texas. Lampkin back really does hurt him regardless. We saw him play 27 against Texas Tech without Lampkin. His value is really tied to the, Lampkin being in or out. And his price is up to almost $6K now. So regardless of how great his rates are, I think I do jump off of him at this point and really only want to look at Mike Miles, who I still think, and I thought he was really cheap at I know he didn't play well last game, but I thought he was really cheap at 7.6. Now his price is down to 7.2. Since he's been back, he hasn't had that eruption game. But last time back in late January when he played Oklahoma, and this was at home, 23 real points, got to the foul line, made all 10 of his free throws, put up 30 fantasy points. 30 to 32 at this 7.2 price point is really, really good. And I think he's going to, be a little bit overlooked, maybe, under-owned for where he probably should be for his skill set, his ability, his upside at the 7.2 price point. So I definitely like Mike Miles yet again here, even though I admit he hasn't really been performing to par. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Damian Bowe is just having a very, very good season. Put up another 50 bomb against Texas last time out. He's just playing so well. Typically an assist guy, rebound guy, steals guy, but he's scoring this season, and that's just taken his game to a whole nother level, and why he's priced at almost 9K. You do have some value here. Micah Peavy is at 3.6. He's still, regardless of how healthy TCU is getting, playing around 18 to 20 minutes. So at 3.6, I don't hate that. That's another one of those values you can throw into the pool. You take it or leave it kind of thing. He could put up 18. He could put up 5. Just somebody that if you're doing the mini max or you're maxing out, the bigger GPPs, whatever you're doing, getting some PV exposure makes a little bit of sense here at 3.6 just to give yourself some of that variety. Otherwise, though, this game, I could take it or leave it. And it's that 3 o'clock for you East Coasters, but 12 o'clock game that, it's going to bleed into the afternoon slate, and they could have just left it off. But they got it on here. We got some plays here. What do you think? Sherfield and Miles, both underpriced, but, man, they just don't look like the normal elite versions of themselves.
Yeah, a lot of the Miles thing is definitely, Damian Baugh, the way that he's kind of taking control of the offense. It's not like he's jacking up 20 shots, but he has the ball in his hands a little bit more. I wonder, some of it is Miles is just used to being able to create for himself rather than relying on somebody else to get him the ball in spots. I actually, from TCU side, I don't mind Emmanuel Miller at all. Seems kind of like one of those just safe plays. Priced up a little bit. He jumped 700, but he's got back-to-back 33-plus games, 32-plus DK points in 3 out of the last 4. He just seems like he's playing well, which, it's always a solid thing. Especially again, Oklahoma likes to slow it down a little bit more. I tend to lean forwards in those matchups. As it is, he's far more athletic than Groves is from a rebounding standpoint as well. So, I think he has a shot at a double-double again. I've used PV quite a bit. I'm a little annoyed that he's not starting anymore, so that puts me back on O'Bannon a little bit at 4,300 now that he's started the last 2 games. But again, he's just another value guy in that range. He had to get there last game, relying on peripherals because he took 1 shot from the field. So there's games where he's going to have that, but he's been at 19 plus in 3 out of the last 4. So He's kind of just another guy in that low 4K range that I think you can go to that's not going to kill you. He just doesn't have the upside of like a Toussaint or Mashak at that price point. But he's safer than Toussaint, which is kind of strange to say, I guess. As long as he starts again, should say. Oklahoma sidewise, whenever I see Sherfield at, any kind of 7K price point, like I just think I have to play him somewhere. Like the 6X plus upside is just so inviting, and it's actually a good matchup. But he just disappears so much. And the fact that he put up 6 DK points in the first meeting, like, just blows my mind. He doesn't look like the same guy that, came from Nevada. I don't really know, but I will have shares just because I know what he's capable of doing, and he should basically carry very little ownership. So Groves, I don't know. He jumped 700 after putting up 13.5. And he, similar to Trey Mitchell, I was all over Groves last time out. So I need to go back to him. It's just really tough for me to commit to at this point. Because he fouled out in 18 minutes in the first matchup as well. So that's a worry. He fouled out then. He's had 4 fouls in each of the last 2 games. He fouled out 4 games ago. So his foul numbers are up right now. And I don't want another experience where he commits 2 fouls in the first 3 minutes again. Or it might have even been 2 minutes. I don't remember what it was last game. I think Uzan and Owe are probably fine. I just don't see myself going there. Which I mean, with it being such a nice pace up for Oklahoma, I probably should consider them more, but at this point I'm just done trying to predict what they do. And Uzan being priced up a little bit kind of takes away a ceiling, and I'm not really expecting him to go for 30 plus every time out at this point. So as much as I want to be on Oklahoma, I don't see myself getting there in any of my main builds or variations. It's really just getting there on my out of left field type builds that I kind of throw in after I've built, 12 to 15, and I just try to get creative.
Yeah, and I kind of, outside of Uzan, I feel like when you watch the Sooners play, that they're kind of just ready to be done. I hate questioning, guys, being done or wanting to play, but it just seems like they don't have it. They're not into it. The season's done, and that's why Uzan's been so good. So I'm kind of leery of using any of the Sooners as well. So that is the slate. There are a lot of values. There aren't as many, at least to me, there aren't as many pay-ups that I'm super psyched about. I think we're both in agreement. Soriano, Franklin, Noel is kind of really a strong group, maybe a little Oscar, but it's a weird slate. I thought it when I looked at the game set 2 days ago of what would possibly be on the slate, and then when it came out earlier today, it's just a really weird one. So I guess the cores I think are going to end up being weird because we're going to see a couple of these higher owned values, but I think the rest of the spots could be a wide variety of ownerships just because there are so many different ways to go in this game. And it's just really odd. So where are you at sitting at this moment for a core?
I mean, probably going to make Marquise Noel a core. Leaning on Franklin, but I don't really know. It'll be Franklin or Soriano. So I'm going to really end up giving you 5 names because I'm still debating. That third core is either going to be Stevie Mitchell or it's going to be Akpara. More of a GPP core than a safety thing with those two, but it's really going to come down to how my construction plays out. Akpara, just because we've talked about so many value plays, but they're almost all guards. And so, like I mentioned earlier when we talked about that game, like me going with Akpara as one of my value plays automatically is going to make my build a little bit different than what we presume to be the chalkier build. So that's kind of why I'm leading him. But being able to go to Stevie Mitchell in that game with Marquette's team total, getting a piece of that without having to spend 9,100 on Kolek or take a shot with Oso or Omax or whatever, that's intriguing enough for me that I might end up there, over guys like Quinterly who expect to be extremely popular.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that, I think for me, and a popular value being Jacoby Wright, but I think it makes too much sense. He's near the top of the list for me in value just because he should play a whole lot of minutes here, gets a matchup against Georgia that is great. And if he's taking 7+ shots at this price, he doesn't, have to do a whole lot to really pay off this price tag. So I think him and also from this game, GG Jackson. So in my core, I'm running 2 guys from South Carolina, which can be a good thing, but this Georgia matchup's just so good. And I don't expect Jackson to be very highly owned. He never is when South Carolina's on the slate. Seems to have put behind him the little, scuffle with the staff. His shot attempts over the last 4 games have been really high. 17 against LSU, 20 against Bama, 12 against Mississippi State, and 12 against Tennessee. Now, he hasn't hit those at a very big number, but one thing he does is get himself to the foul line a ton, and he's very active on the glass, and he won't stop chucking. He's not one of those guys where if they don't hit the first shot or two, it's like, well, that's a bad game for them because they're going to hang their head. He doesn't care. He'll continue to chuck, and he contributes in a myriad of ways. So I got to go with GG Jackson as a core for me. That might change in the morning before a lock happens, but as of right now, Jacoby Wright, GG Jackson, and then the third guy, I want to go to that Marquette game. And it's kind of, chintzy, and I'm kind of, being lame here. But I think Stevie Mitchell at 3.8, he makes too much sense as well. Him and Jacoby Wright, 2 sub 4K guys. Again, they're guards. You said we're going to run out of guard positions here in a hurry. But this might allow me to just pay for Soriano and Franklin at that forward spot and just, go extremely high price with those forward slots. So Stevie Mitchell, Jacoby Wright, and GG Jackson. Terry Roberts not in the core, but you can rest assured that I'm going to be playing a lot of Terry Roberts. I'm not going to name a posh play for this slate, but if there was going to be a posh play, it would be him because I do not believe he's going to continue to underperform for us. This is a matchup that he has to perform, has to produce, has to come through for us on the last regular season game of the season. All right, that is it. We're going to get into PrizePicks real quick here, running a little late, but that's okay. I just want to mention the afternoon slate is actually fire. There's Wake Forest, Syracuse on that slate, so of course we can target Wake Forest guys. Virginia Tech, it's FSU. Missouri, who my man Demoy Hodge was good for us the other night, he's there. We have LSU and Florida. There's just really a lot of fantasy goodness there. Bobby Klintman, I think, will take some of that high post cheese, and Cameron Hildreth against Syracuse, and then Will Richard of Florida. So we'll talk more in length about that in the Discord tomorrow, but I just wanted to mention that afternoon slate, how we do with those secondary slates. We usually do pretty well on those. And as far as volume goes, that's one that I would definitely recommend that you play relatively heavily or what you're comfortable doing because it is such a great slate. All right, PrizePicks, pulling that up here. Been running pretty good this week on PrizePicks. We've been having the low to mid majors available to us, and we've just been crushing it. The WCC yesterday with Maxwell Lewis had to sweat that a little bit, but he came through. All of those were very good games. Now, looking at the fantasy totals here, we have 26.8 fantasy points for GG Jackson going up against Georgia. I like the over there, and I even like his teammate Michi Johnson to hit the over 23.5 fantasy point number that they've given him. I think both of those guys have the opportunity here. Michi's points also are pretty alluring, over 12.5 real points. Give me both of those guys as 2 of my priority plays here on PrizePicks. Again, doing the show at night, sometimes we don't get the full board like we had been during the daytime show. So there'll be more that come out tomorrow morning, and I will definitely be updating my tracker accordingly. One other one that I want to bring up, though, is the fact that Marquise Noel is sitting there at 33.5 fantasy points. That might seem relatively high, but I think he does flirt with 40 plus relatively easy in this matchup as a road warrior. So give me that over 33.5 fantasy points on Marquise Noel as well. Do you have any prize picks you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I like the Tyrese Radford or Gabe Kalsher numbers. Kalsher at 20.2 fantasy points seems low compared to the amount of shots that he's going to have to put up for them. And Radford at 26.5 because of his ability to pick up steals. But I also looked at Radford over 22.5 PRA as well. I think that's important. I mean, some of that is going to depend on Dennis. Like, we kind of need Dennis to be out for me to feel more secure about that. But Kalsher's definitely going to be one of my go-tos, just because I feel like he's just going to have to do a whole lot. Not that he's some, stud or anything out there, but the extra shots from Caleb Grill being gone, the fact that Iowa State just needs offense on the road, kind of forces that to stand out for me. And then, one of Croswell or Hopkins, like their fantasy scores. Croswell's at 28.6, Hopkins at 31.5. We talked about how we like the Providence forwards in that matchup, and they both, went off in the first meeting, combining for 49 or 45 and 19. I think there's a chance that both of them get there, but for sure one of them should over those numbers.
I like that call. Looking at the DK prop market, which also led me to look at PrizePicks again, but Ronald Polite of George Mason, 20.5 PRA on both PrizePicks and DK, going up against Richmond. Last time he played them in 35 minutes, 22 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. Don't have to worry about any turnovers there, of course, with the PRA. And lately, he has been putting up some pretty solid numbers. Just recently against Fordham, 12.7 rebounds, 7 assists, 22 points, 2 rebounds, 6 assists against Dayton, 15.6 rebounds, 6 assists against LaSalle. So give me that over 20.5 PRA on Ronald Polite of George Mason going up against Richmond on both DK and PrizePicks. I am all over that one, and there is a huge board available on DK. So I will be loading up the tracker on both PrizePicks and betting tracker on FTN bets. But just giving you a little bit of a sneak peek there, that Polite play is going to be one that I am heavily involved with. All right, that will do it. We have covered the entire slate. Feel pretty good about this one. Again, just a really weird slate. I can't decide if it's going to be high scoring or not. There's so much value available, but I think that the name of the game is going to be more so than usual, avoiding those landmines that are inevitably going to come. So I appreciate you joining me on this late night. Razzle will have to, plenty of times to do it again. And I got daytime shows coming up. So we'll talk about your schedule here coming up over the next week or two, but going to be doing a show pretty much every day. So I can use all the help that I can get.
Yeah, we'll try to work something out. And day might be a little rough with me having an office job these days, but might be able to make it work just because I know I'm going to have to take some time off to be able to cover everything that I do.
Yep.
With baseball starting, I'm covering that daily now too. So a lot going on, so might have to use some personal time and jump on a show.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, and I'll have some night shows coming up on Thursday, Friday, either way. So we'll get you back on here, and it's blasphemous to work on the first round of the tournament. So I'm gonna make sure that nobody's working on that day, especially not me. Right. Appreciate everybody who continues to support the show. Thank you very much to Raz for coming on. Lots of opportunity tomorrow to make money via PrizePicks, DFS, and the betting. I want to see lots of green screens and lots of DMs, tweets, and everything else. Thanks, Raz. Thanks, everyone else, to watch the show. Good luck tomorrow.